orthodoxy. Are the Democrats missing the forest for the trees, fighting their own as Trump and his ilk dismantle America from within?
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then we talk with documentary filmmaker, PBS champion Ken Burns. He zooms in on the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was a bloody turning point for the scrappy revolutionaries back in 1775. What lessons can we learn from it and the revolution today? Plus, we'll hear Ken's thoughts on the battle in Congress over funding for PBS and NPR. That's all ahead, 11 o'clock hour at BPR and GBH and NEPM, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. A federal appeals court will hear arguments today on President Trump's decision to send National Guard troops to Los Angeles in response to immigration protests. From member station KQED, Marisa Lagos reports.
Last week, U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer sided with California, ruling that the president acted illegally when he activated 4,000 National Guard troops without consulting Governor Gavin Newsom. Breyer ordered Trump to return control of the Guard to the governor. But within hours of that decision, a three-judge panel from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals blocked Breyer's ruling and scheduled today's noon hearing. The appeals court panel includes 2 Trump appointees and 1 judge appointed by former President Joe Biden. They'll consider whether the temporary restraining order was warranted. For NPR News, I'm Marisa Lagos in San Francisco.
The NAACP is not inviting President Trump to its national convention next month. He's the first sitting U.S. president not to ask to attend in the civil rights organization's 116-year history. NPR's Kristen Wright reports the White House is responding to the snub.
In a statement, a White House spokesman criticizes the NAACP as advancing hate and division, while President Trump is focused on, quote, uniting our country and improving our economy. The spokesman also says that's the vision supported by many Black Americans in Trump's reelection. The NAACP's president says Trump's not invited because he's, quote, attacking our democracy and civil rights and signed unconstitutional executive orders to oppress voters and undo federal civil rights protections. The group has welcomed both Democratic and Republican presidents to speak at its annual convention. President Ronald Reagan addressed members. So did President George W. Bush in the wake of Hurricane Katrina after declining previous invitations. Trump declined the NAACP's invitations to speak during his first term. Kristen Wright, NPR News, Washington.
Legal experts say a federal bankruptcy court is likely to approve a new $7.4 billion opioid settlement with Purdue Pharma and members of the Sackler family. But NPR's Brian Mann reports some critics say the deal does not offer enough compensation to opioid victims.
All 50 states and U.S. territories have now signed off on a deal that would direct most of the payout to governments for spending on addiction treatment and health programs. Only about $850 million will go to people addicted to Purdue Pharma's OxyContin pain medications or to families who lost loved ones to overdose. Ryan Hampton, who is addicted to OxyContin for more than a decade, says he'll only receive about $3,500.
And for $3,500 to be a paycheck to absolve Purdue's role in destroying my life is a meaningless gesture. But at this point, I'm ready to put this behind me.
Parties negotiating final details of the settlement will be back in federal bankruptcy court this week. Brian Mann, NPR News.
On Wall Street, the Dow is down more than 95 points at this hour. You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. The jury in the retrial of Karen Reed is into its second full day of deliberations today. Judge Beverly Cannoni asked lawyers to be back in the courtroom by 4 p.m. this afternoon unless they are needed sooner. No comment from Karen Reed when she left court yesterday after the jury's first full day of deliberations. 1 in 3 households here in Massachusetts are facing food insecurity. So says a new report by the Greater Boston Food Bank and Mass General Brigham. This year's study focuses on the impacts of hunger on society, like the social disconnection associated with it, the health of children and adults, and health care. While food insecurity didn't improve overall and did increase slightly in mainly rural areas of Massachusetts, Greater Boston Food Bank Senior Policy Director Kate Adams says the report also shows some positives, like how child-level food insecurity has decreased slightly. The study is funded through a U.S. Department of Agriculture grant. And a federal judge appointed by the late President Ronald Reagan has accused the Trump administration of appalling and obviously clear discrimination against racial minorities and LGBTQ plus Americans. Yesterday, U.S. District Judge William Young's accusations came during a court hearing and was a reference to two executive orders signed by Trump that led the National Institutes of Health to rescind funding for research related to racial minorities and LGBTQ plus people. Clouds with spotty showers throughout the day today, high near 70. We are at 70 degrees. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include AG1, introducing AG1 Next Gen, a daily drink with vitamins, minerals, and probiotics to support overall health. Learn more at drinkag1.com/science.
Hey, it's Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. You're listening to Boston Public Radio on GBH and NEPM. We are broadcasting live. Thank you from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're not here tomorrow. It's our annual staff retreat, Jim. Looking forward to that. We're doing a best of show, but we'll be back on Friday. Ask the Governor will be with us 11 to 12 on June 25th. That's the 25th. Obviously, that's Maura Healey. And from 1 to 2 today, we'll be joined by the Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. Good morning, Jim.
And Ken Burns in 30
minutes.
minutes.
Oh, yeah, Ken Burns. That's right.
Pretty full show.
Pretty full show.
A lot of ink has been spilled about the future of the Democratic Party after Trump's second presidential win. It's too woke. It's not woke enough. It's too old. It's unresponsive to the needs of the working class. And at least one argument goes, they need to stop being so judgmental when people aren't read in on the social issues, or maybe are read in and have varying opinions about those social issues. As Joan Vanocchi, who'll be with us Friday for Press Play, by the way, writes in today's Globe, quote, unless you pass a strict purity test on issues ranging from LGBTQ rights to immigration, you will be subjected to hounding and harassment. So while Trump's second term is actively working to silence free speech on college campuses via protest crackdowns, should everyone else be paying attention to a different form of silencing? The lines are open. What do you think the Democratic Party should look like? What issues should they focus on? How best should they win back the working class and actually win back some branches of government? Should concerned over party purity, which risks alienating supporters of people like Gavin Newsom, John Fetterman, Seth Moulton, be pushed aside? Our number is 877-301-8097. You have pretty strong feelings about this, Marjorie.
Well, you know, we have been talking for weeks, not just about the atrocities that's going on that people may not like about what President Trump is doing, but how the Democrats are just in the toilet in terms of popularity, even with Democrats, you know, in the sense that Democrats, the leadership doesn't listen enough to rank and file Democrats who kept saying for months and months and months that Joe Biden shouldn't run again because he was too old. I think that there's in academics, you know, the so-called West Coast, East Coast elites, people in the media, we do, and progressives who are not a huge part, at least according to Joan Vanocchi's column today, of the Democratic Party overall, that if Democrats want to win again, it would be good to be a little bit less judgmental of people who are what we used to call the lunch bucket Democrats, or people who might be working 2 or 3 jobs, who don't have time to understand all of the nuances of how things move in on social issues. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, they get flummoxed when they're in groups of people that are used like they, them. You know, it's a common thing that we in the media talk about people who are non-binary, who are trans, they, them. Well, I think for a lot of people that's hard. And it doesn't really mean that they're against those people or they're homophobic.
Even if you don't use the proper pronouns.
Yes, they just aren't up with the lingo or they aren't into it. And I think your intention matters a lot. And I think we are quick to jump down people's throats. Yeah, I think we are.
So you think it should be more tolerant, fewer purity tests, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing if somebody does something that you think is outrageous to say, hey, you know, let's talk about this or let's have a discussion about this. But we tend to, and I think, you know, Seth Moulton's done a lot of great things. I thought he expressed his opposition to trans athletes in a pretty bad way, and he got trashed for that. But
including right here, including by you, by the way.
Right.
And you're now advocating
well, I'm not
tolerance
advocating
and inclusion.
No, what I'm saying is I think there are a lot of people who are the regular Joe and Jane, are going about their lives, who find it a hard concept to get around that young women should be competing against trans women. They find it hard to, you look at the polls, most Americans find that very hard to get around. Doesn't mean they don't want trans people to have rights, they don't want trans people to be in the military, they don't want trans people to have the same rights and respect and dignity as everybody else. They just find that one difficult, and that doesn't mean that they're horrible people.
I have to say, most of the people I know are with you. Those who are not Trump fans believe that more tolerance, larger tent, I hate that expression, but you know what I mean, fewer purity tests is the way to go. I acknowledge that's the majority of the non-Trump world, but I guess my response to that is, as intolerant as many Democrats are of people who don't agree with them, there has never been a more intolerant leader in the history of this country of differing opinions than Donald Trump. And despite that purity test, intolerance, etc., he won the presidency, he won the Senate, and he won the House. So how does that fit into the notion that being more inclusive and more tolerant is the way to win an election?
Because I think some of those people think that the left is looking down on them and thinks they're a bunch of dopes. Yeah. I think that's part of it. But it's kind of like it might matter more to look at and Joan mentions this in her column. Look at the policies. Don't talk about who somebody is. Look at their policies. And I would argue that the Democrats' policies are much better for people in this, again, I'm using this overusing this term, but the average lunch bucket Democrats used to talk about. The policies are much better in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, parental leave, all this kind of stuff. But we get too hung up sometimes on the who you are as opposed to what you're espousing. So I think that's part of it too.
877-301-8897.
And by the way,
do you agree with the Venaki-Egan analysis of one of the reasons why the Democratic Party is in the toilet? The most recent poll I saw, by the way, had the Democrats at 19% approval, which is half of the pathetically low approval of the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So they really have a ways to go. We should add to this discussion, by the way, which I think is a variation maybe on what you're saying. I don't want to speak for him, but Anand Girdadas was with us. And
he said something
he wrote
similar.
That great piece about we haven't had a reckoning. Now, I'm not sure he would describe a reckoning exactly like you might, but obviously he thinks there's got to be a different way of thinking too.
Well, yeah, and there's a huge, I am very pro-choice. I mean, most Democrats are pro-choice, most Republicans are pro-choice, most of the country is pro-choice. But should that mean that you should jump down somebody's throat? Now, if their vote matters on that issue, which is a very big issue, then you could say that I can't stand to vote for that person. But should you make your tent big enough to accept people who are anti-choice? I'm not sure, but there's a lot of people who are.
Here's Marianne from Franklin giving even a better example than I think we're giving of intolerance. Let's talk about David Hogg. David's been on our show a bunch of times, obviously a survivor of the massacre at Parkland. He was elected as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. He espoused opposition to certain incumbent Democrats. He was removed the other day from the Democratic National Committee. The DNC says that wasn't the reason. It was because of a technicality with the vote. But what Marianne says, he will not run again, this is Hogg, for his Democratic National Committee vice chair position. He announced on Tuesday amid a firestorm the 25-year-old activist sparked over his pledge to take on ineffective Democratic incumbents. Hogg is a perfect example, I think, of what you're talking about. He represents a huge wing of the Democratic young people, most of whom probably agree with him about the ineffectiveness of certain incumbents and thinks they should be challenged. And he was dumped from the DNC. What was achieved by dumping him?
I don't know. I thought he was a very talented. We've interviewed him before. He's really smart. He's really talented. I thought he would have been a great up-and-coming Democrat, but I think he may have been a little bit turned off by what ended up happening to him. And by the way, there's no comparison here. I mean, she says this in her column. There is no parity between the cruelty of Trump's policies and the insults hurled at Democrats. I mean, it's another level, obviously. But her point is Democrats want want to win, and things are not looking very good for Democrats at the moment, even though the polls are starting to turn on Trump.
877-301-8870. Is more tolerance, more inclusion, more acceptance of differing opinions a key, the key to a Democratic revival? Edward in Seattle, welcome to the show. Hey.
Good morning. First-time caller, long-time listener.
We really appreciate that, Edward. What's up?
Well, I have been voting Democrat most of my life. I'm in my 70s now, and I have finally become so disgusted with the party that I've given up supporting them because I think they've lost their way.
How so?
Well, you talk about David Hogg, for instance. They're not recognizing or empowering the new people, the new blood that's coming into the party who really could focus on some changes that we need desperately.
So what do you do if you abandon the Democratic Party? I'm not challenging you. I'm asking you. Where do you go? Nowhere?
Well, that's a really good question. I was a delegate for Bernie back in 2016. Wow. But I think there are some voices in this country that need to be amplified. And certainly I respect him because he said the same thing for 50 years.
He has
but
indeed.
He needs some more honesty.
Edward, thanks for listening. Thanks for finally calling, and we hope you call us again soon. Appreciate it. 877-301-8870. Cameron in JP has an interesting point. We had a large tent. What did you think we did this last election? You literally had Liz Cheney as one. This is a wonderful point.
That is
of one
a
of
good
your
point.
spokespeople. You couldn't have been more inclusive if you tried.
Yep.
Liz Cheney, other than believing in democracy and being brilliant on the January 6th committee, probably agrees with nothing in the Democratic platform other than the embrace of democracy.
I know.
Well, that's a wonderful, but that texter makes a wonderful point.
He makes a wonderful point, but there was a lot of criticism of allowing
that's true.
Liz Cheney to be up on the stage with Kamala Harris during the election. Listen to this one. This person is really mad at me. I usually love your show, but today I had to turn it off, and I heard Marjorie say Democrats are in the toilet. I look around the country, see Republicans throwing senators to the floor, handcuffing them. Michael Lee saying the most cruel statements about political assassinations. Trump left the G7 early, and she goes on and on, or he goes on and listing all the terrible things that Republicans have done, and that's true. But again, I think that the point is the Democrats are doing something wrong, and maybe this is part of what the Democrats are doing wrong. I think it's much bigger than this, obviously. I think it's Democrats promising, and failing to deliver. But that's another topic.
What did Donald Trump deliver in 4 years that caused him to be reelected 4 years later? What delivery did he make?
Well, I would say people thought he delivered on the economy.
Did he? Did he?
Americans believed it. And they also this time are going to say if they like what he's doing. He shut down the immigration coming over the southern border, which he said he was going to do, and he has.
Sheila, well, actually, I would say
Biden started
did
first, but
Sheila in North Attleboro says Democrats come together, find compromise quickly, take a page out of Republicans, stick together no matter what, pick 3 priorities, keep the message simple. Well, that is done pretty well for the GOP. Rob in Connecticut. Hey there, you're on BPR. Welcome.
Hey guys, good morning. Love the show.
Thank you.
A place for the defected Democrats to go. We need to rally behind Marjorie. Marjorie for president.
That's right. I didn't want to mention it myself. I thought it would be a little arrogant, but I'm glad you're with me, Bob. We're starting the campaign tomorrow.
Did you hear the applause in the studio? Once is plenty. Thank you. That is more than enough. Thank you very much, though. I'm sorry, Rob. Continue. Oh, that was it.
He's gone.
He's just endorsing your candidacy.
I tell you, he's a man ahead of his game.
Now, let me ask you a question. I've known you for a long time.
Yep.
Are you as tolerant of differences of opinion as you're arguing the Democratic Party should be, Marjorie? Speaking of choice, since you brought that up, an unnamed guest who we were talking about with our boss yesterday hasn't been on the show in 3 years because she and you almost killed each other over choice.
We got into a spat.
Was that an inclusionary behavior on your part?
Well, I thought she started it. I thought it was all her. I thought it was all her fault. But I'll give you an example. I think choice is a good issue. Or that when you talk to people about where they are on these things, obviously they're more nuanced. they're more nuanced. I think we often don't give people enough credit for nuance. I'm a big fan of charter schools. I think as you know, I don't like the fact that the teachers' unions in general do not like reform, and I think the public schools are in bad shape.
I don't agree with that.
But you're not supposed to say that in the Democratic Party, Jim. You're not supposed to say that. You got to be all in with the teachers' unions, and I think that's a big mistake because
Josh Shapiro supports charter schools. He's a big, huge, rising Democrat.
I know.
Governor of Pennsylvania.
Josh and I are going to start the campaign
I'm sure
together.
that'll be. Hey, so, let me say something to you. I think I said on the air yesterday, if I did, apologies for repeating myself, but it fits this conversation. The issue that Seth Moulton got in trouble with on some people was I don't want I'm paraphrasing, I don't want my young girls playing sports with a guy on
being run over on the field or something. He didn't say it well.
I would agree with that. But I want to repeat what I said yesterday when people are criticizing, like you, the Democrats for their position on that. What I said yesterday is totally true. The Democrats were not campaigning on that issue. The brilliance of the pro-Trump PACs is they spent tens of millions of dollars attacking the Democrats, and the Democrats had to respond. So it was their inept strategic positioning rather than them sitting in a room saying, we have to lead with that issue. They just didn't do that.
Listen,
they were just forced into a box.
The Republicans are really good at so-called wedge issues.
They are.
I mean, when George W. ran for president, what was his big wedge issue? Gay marriage. Look, all these years later, most people are in favor of gay marriage, and I'm hoping down the road that trans issues will be much less of a dividing line between people. But people often move slowly. I mean, you think if you're sitting at your holiday Thanksgiving dinner with your grandmother or something, generally speaking, people that are older are a little bit slower on the uptake on some of these things.
If Liliana from Full Rivers, your grandmother, they're not slower on the uptake. Raphael in North Adams, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi. I would like to bring up that the Democrats would do well to put away their go-to strategy of punching to their left every time they're worried about an upcoming election. And I think this really came through in the last election on the Palestine issue. I feel like Biden and then Harris completely gave up an opportunity to be the peace candidate.
I agree with you.
And to come out with a full-throated opposition to the ongoing genocide, and they completely avoided doing that. And if it had been a closer election, that would have been the issue that lost them the election.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Raphael. Thank you for your call. They did dance as much as they could, and Joe Biden was still providing weaponry when at least Marjorie and I thought it was inappropriate, even though we don't have the expertise. But, Raphael, we agree with you. Thanks for the call. 877-301-8970. Here's an interesting text. Joe Manchin, the former United States Senator from West Virginia, was vilified by the Democrats. Wouldn't it be nice to have 4 or 5 Joe Manchins in the Senate right now to stop Trump's cabinet picks and the big, beautiful bill? How are you going to win a majority if you don't encourage Joe Manchin-type candidates to run in purple or even red state? Now, that's a really interesting thing, because Manchin, even though you and I criticized him in cinema virtually every single day, the point the texter makes is a really important point. No Democrat wins in West Virginia except people like Joe Manchin. So the Democrats have to say, I'm going to tolerate Joe Manchin's egomania and desire to be center stage and divisive at the same time, or be pure and have a Republican elected to fill a seat, which is exactly what happened.
Well, the bigger problem for me, for Joe Manchin, is he almost tanked the whole infrastructure bill that was going to be the biggest thing ever done for climate change, because, of course, he makes lots of money from coal and coal plants. That was my biggest problem.
But I think what this guy would say is you have at least a chance of getting a Manchin vote. You have no chance of getting his successor's vote, the Republican. So maybe you should acknowledge the reality that he's not from Cambridge, he's from West Virginia.
Well, it would be nice, like, again, if you could talk about the big policies that, there's a mention in this story about how the student loan forgiveness was a tough policy for a lot of Democrats because most Americans have never been to college. So that was a hard one to hear about over and over again, because people think, well, gee, I couldn't afford to go to college. I didn't go to college. And now people who sign on the dotted line want to get their loans back. Well, what about me? Nobody helped me go to vocational school, and nobody helped me go to, learn how to be a member of the trades or something like that. that.
Pete in New Hampshire texts, the Democratic Party is far from inclusive. When Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Fetterman, etc., don't follow the narrative, they're immediately called Russian agents, conspiracy theorists, and are destroyed by Democrats. I would leave Fetterman out of the discussion. Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian agent and is a conspiracy theorist. That's why we call her that.
Yeah.
And RFK Jr. is, I would argue, mentally ill, but that's a topic not for today.
The worm is just getting to him, Jim. I mean, it was
The
docile
residue
for a
of the
while.
worm.
It was docile. Well, maybe it sprung back to life. Maybe it's regenerated itself. Rachel in Dalton, thank you for calling.
Hi, Rachel.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine,
We're good.
thank you.
I love your program.
Thanks.
I'm sitting in my car with my flip phone, and I hope you're not getting what do you call that, feedback?
Feedback, yeah. The connection's
It's not
great.
good.
So maybe if you cut to the chase, I don't mean that disrespectfully, we won't miss it.
I know.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, I believe the Democratic Party's in as much problem as both parties, and my stand is the problem is entrenched politicians that will not get out of office. And the party, I do not think, was relating to everyday people and people on Main Street. I love your program.
Thanks, Rachel. Can I tell you about politicians who won't get out? There was a big story in the New York Times, the Washington Post, about somebody I had some engagement with years ago, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's the non-voting delegate from D.C. She's 88. They say she's totally out of it, as was Dianne Feinstein. But it's not just on the Democratic side. How old's Chuck Grassley? 89 from Iowa?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you, by the way, Rachel. I don't know if this is I'm a pro-age limit kind of guy for the Supreme Court, for Congress, for all these kind of things, but I know that's not popular because it's seen as ageist, but I'm basically where you are. Rachel, thank you very much for the call. We got to take a break.
A lot of the texters are really mad that I'm criticizing the Democrats at all. I guess I'm not supposed to criticize
Well,
the
by the way,
Democrats.
that is exactly what the problem is. You can't even criticize in a discussion.
Well,
there you
I'm in
have
trouble.
me.
I'm in trouble. My campaign may be nipped in the bud, Jim. It may not get very far.
MarjorieForMass.org.
Okay, we're talking.
Jamie's creating it as we speak. Her motto, people often move slowly.
People often move slowly.
I love that. That is
That's
really
right. And the
an
older you
organizing
get,
principle.
the more slowly you move.
Look at these people.
Okay,
What's wrong with them?
877-301-8970 is the number to call or text. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We are broadcasting here and on NEPM in the western part of the state, and we're talking about whether Democrats need to be a little bit more open-minded and a little less judgmental about people who do not pass so-called purity tests. You're listening to Boston Public Radio. Right.
I'm Jared Bowen. Today on The Culture Show, artist Dred Scott. Through visual and performance art, he interrogates a history of racism in America while exposing the struggles of bigotry today. And if you're in search of ideas and intellectual stimulation, Imari Paris Jeffries has you covered. He joins us to preview this year's Embrace Ideas Festival. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Dean & Hamilton with Compass Real Estate. Their website includes listings of homes from Hingham to Duxbury, as well as information about each South Shore community. More about the team and current listings at deanandhamilton.com. And Revolve Dance Project, presenting Sound and Form, a collaboration of live music and dance. 2 performances, Sunday, June 29th at the Strand in Providence at 2 and 6. More at revolvedanceproject.com.
Welcome back to BPR and GBH and NEPM. Marjorie and Jim Bradley. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're not here tomorrow. We're on tape for our annual one-day staff retreat. Back live on Friday. Ask the Governor is here June 25th, Governor Healy, from 11 to 12. And we're about 10 minutes away from Ken Burns zooming in on Bunker Hill Day. We're talking to you about whether or not the Democratic Party, which is in disfavor with the American people right now, big time, One of their problems and one of the ways to rehabilitate themselves is to be more inclusive, have fewer purity tests, be more tolerant of those who don't, check all the right boxes. Marjorie totally subscribes to that. I'm not sure I do, but a lot of you do. 877-301-8970.
Listen to this from Mitch in New Bedford. The Dems need to get better at trash talking the GOP, just straight up lies and gaslights. Only that Congresswoman Crockett from Texas ever stands up to MAGAs. Yeah, she's really good. I've seen her on television a lot.
Well, Chris Murphy does.
Chris Murphy's
the senator
very
from
good.
Connecticut.
Yep.
Pritzker, the senator
Pritzker.
from... And I think we have a couple of Democrats in this state, one of whom is going to join us at 1 o'clock. Mayor Wu doesn't take any crap from
Jamie
these
Raskin,
people.
he's a congressman.
Yeah, Maryland.
And I think Gavin Newsom has done a kind of a 180 since he was trying to cozy up to some of the Trump people on his early podcast. I think he's gone in the other direction.
Where do you want to go?
Okay, let's go to John in Salisbury. Thank you for calling.
Hello, John.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I really appreciate it. And, as a former Democratic, now currently unenrolled voter, I do have some opinions on the Democratic Party.
Oh, good, good.
I also think, it's important to remember, in talking about purity tests, I think we have to remember we should be looking at the purity tests of constituents of the elected officials and stop putting everybody on a national platform. I mean, every place is going to be different. And I have my own issues with Seth Moulton. Would I vote for him again? Depending on who else is running, I would. But I think part of the Democratic role, the dismay, is that everybody is now on a national platform and we're not at the local level anymore.
So what do you mean? Something will play in Massachusetts?
Joe Manchin
won't play in Alabama?
Right. Isn't that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so everybody knows, we all know the representative from Texas who is amazing and we all love her. But, why should I hold her to the same purity test that I hold others if they are not my representative directly, and kind of just separating out the national level versus the local level?
I think it's a good point.
Yeah,
John,
that is a good point.
Very
That is a good point. And I think that one of the things that we mentioned this before, this doesn't do with purity test, but the sense that Democrats don't listen to Democrats, Democratic politicians and Democratic operatives don't listen to what people are trying to tell them. They're telling.
What is that?
Well, I
think
Biden. I think Biden was a classic example.
Oh, you mean not leaving?
And I think it is really annoying when you are working 2 and 3 jobs and you can't afford a house and you can't afford anything to keep hearing the unemployment rate is low, and the stock market is doing well. It doesn't really help. What are you laughing at?
I'm laughing because and by the way, a decent amount of the criticism you're leveling at the Democrats and your notions of reform, other than your own candidacy, I agree with. But the American people decided.
You don't think I should run?
Sure, why not? Sure. Take a month off and see how it goes.
Go ahead.
No, that threw me a
Jim
little bit.
Jim ran for governor for a week.
A week, I did.
Yeah, he did well.
That did well. Thank you. I don't think we were talking about me, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
He actually did it. Can you imagine? He actually did it.
Oh, my God. Okay, where was I going?
You were criticizing
there's a guy,
me.
The notion that people have to behave and act in a certain way. Again, the American people elected a leader of the country who was a leader of a party who was tolerant of no differences of opinion, totally running counter, who you may have heard is also a felon, and you also may have heard was found liable for sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll. So the point is that I think normal kinds of analyses. I should have said this earlier. While I agree with you to a certain degree, the most important thing is leadership. Who's the leader of these Democrats who are in disarray right now?
I don't think we have one.
Don't you? And would you not argue that Barack Obama embraced purity tests as much as anybody? He was a pretty good leader, don't you think?
Well, Barack Obama claimed he was opposed to gay marriage until he was outed by Joe Biden, so he wasn't honest about his opinion about gay marriage.
I'm not talking about honesty. I'm talking about purity. He was pretty much of a purity guy.
I think his classic line was, "Don't let the good enemy of the good, or the good be the perfect." What was he saying?
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
So I would say he was much more pragmatic. I would say
all everybody's writing about is your candidacy. You've totally ruined this whole show. You've ruined any serious discussion about anything. Oh my God!
I tell you, Jim. You just don't know. I mean, I would hate to leave you alone here, having to carry on the show by
yourself.
Let's
try it and see how it goes first. No, let me be clear about this. I want to say it on the air, live.
Yes.
I would seriously consider your candidacy. I would.
Thank you.
I would.
Thank you.
Not
Thank
that seriously, by the way. Not that seriously. Want to see who else is running. if I could be part of the administration, sort of
Hey,
like
Jim,
the RFK thing. Any
don't worry.
jobs?
I'll take care of you. I'll get you a job.
We can squeeze another one in. Megan, you're in Dayton, Ohio. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey, hi. Thanks for taking that.
Of course.
I'm going to take it back to David Hogue. It is Hogue, not Hogg.
I think it's Hogg, but it's okay.
Because,
It's okay.
well,
we
I
know who you're talking about. Go ahead. My apologies. Go ahead.
yeah, for the Democratic Party out.
We're not hearing you.
So,
Megan, I'm really sorry,
Can you hear
but
me now?
no.
Wait,
well,
try
Megan,
again,
let's
try
try it again.
again.
Go ahead.
hello?
Yeah,
Yep, that's
try
better.
it now, quickly.
That's better.
30 seconds.
For the Democratic Party to shut out somebody who is so capable and so on fire and so worthy, they have got my head spinning. I am a registered Green. Obviously, I'm not going to vote for the crazy lady at the top of the Green Party who's been running. And I vote Democratic because I care about the earth, and the Green Party's not doing anything worthy of voting for right now.
Megan, we got to go.
Hogue
We
had
got
a chance.
I am totally with you. I think he's a very,
Hogue,
very
Hogg.
impressive young man, and I think it's
Also,
what
what did the Democrats achieve by dumping him?
Who do they nominate to head that committee? He's the poor guy. He's no longer with us. He died. Conley.
AOC said she was not in. Oh, that was last year.
Yes,
last
Conley,
year.
the guy that just
died.
passed away. Who was a
Megan,
more
thanks.
dynamic leader, young AOC or this guy? I mean, there was no question about it. But they had this thing about seniority and stuff like that. And they didn't listen to the people about Bernie Sanders either. And look how that turned out.
By the way, Marjorie's candidacy, you go to really.com is the name of her campaign website.
And you can look up Jim's candidacy.
Okay.
It was an American tragedy. For us all.
Okay.
Thank you for your calls and texts.
This is really
After this quick
sad
break, we're going to have the
discussion.
legendary PBS filmmaker Ken Burns on the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he's got this great new documentary he's going to tell us about, too. You're listening to BPR on GBH and NEPM, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library.
An Irish rap group called Kneecap faces terror charges over a performer waving a Hezbollah flag at a show. But the band says the flag was thrown by a fan and picked up as a joke.
Around the world, every Kneecap gig, things are thrown onto the stage. And it's extremely commonplace. I don't think a Kneecap gig has happened where someone hasn't thrown something onto the stage.
That story next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the Commonwealth's flagship public university. You can learn more about research, innovation, and economic impact for the Commonwealth at umass.edu. And MIT Federal Credit Union. With a full range of financial services, their financial advisors are committed to helping members' money work for them. Membership's open to the public. More at mitfcu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Welcome back to BPR on GBH and NEPM. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browdy. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Mayor Wu will join us for an hour at 1 o'clock today. But first, if you're ever in trouble with Congress and you're thinking of hiring a lobbyist, here's the guy I'd hire.
Hi, I'm Ken Burns. I've been making films about American history on PBS for nearly 50 years. There's no other place where I can tell our story for all of us. PBS belongs to the American people, to viewers like you. But our PBS is at risk because Congress is considering devastating funding cuts. We need your support now more than ever. Please visit protectmypublicmedia.org to make your voice heard and stand with PBS.
Well, I am convinced, I'll tell you. We're joined now on Zoom by filmmaker Ken Burns on the anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, 250 years ago today. His sweeping documentary, The American Revolution, which we saw lots of clips from at that fabulous night with Ken and Sarah Botstein at the BSO, with Sarah Botstein, comes out later this year, November, on PBS. He'll be in town, or more accurately, on Nantucket, for the 2025 Nantucket Film Festival. It's sold out, so I guess good luck with that. Ken, it's great to see you. Welcome back.
It's great to be with you. I'm keeping my day job, though.
Yeah.
That's what he says now.
I want to start, Ken, with playing a clip from the American Revolution, as Jim said, a new film coming out in November by you, Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt. And in this clip, historian Stephen Conway talks about the Battle of Bunker Hill. And of course, we're celebrating Bunker Hill Day, where the Brits sought high ground at a high cost. Here it is.
40% of the attacking force was killed or injured. 40%. That's horrendously high casualty rate. It is the highest casualty rate for the British Army until the first day of the Somme in 1916.
So tell us about the Battle of Bunker Hill. We're right here with the holiday in Boston. I bet a lot of us don't know anything about it.
Yeah, it's funny, Marjorie. You know, we have just protected the revolution with sort of the barnacles of sentimentality, and we don't realize what an incredibly violent war it is. And that little statistic just knocked my socks off, that here the British were, you know, they had two options. They were surrounded, and the only way were worried that the Patriots were going to get after Lexington and Concord, which started off well for them. They massacred Continentals that were, or militia that were leaving Lexington Green, and then got into serious trouble in Concord and all the way back. So they've been held at bay, and they realize that if the Patriots can get guns up on either Dorchester or Charleston Heights, they're in trouble. They choose Charleston, and it's a victory for them at the end of the day, but they have attacked Patriots in entrenched positions, and it's been disastrous all day long. It's been just harrowing loss. General Howe, the British commander, loses every one of his chief officers, his camp officers. He's covered in blood. The Patriots are picking off. They make 3 charges, and finally, because we, the Patriots, have run out of ammunition and our muskets are fouled from overfiring, they overtake us. But it is, as Rick Atkinson, the American historian, said, a Pyrrhic victory. These are some of the worst hours of fighting that anybody's ever undergone, and the British end up taking it. But it's nothing, and eventually Henry Knox will go get the cannon that's been captured at Ticonderoga and bring it to the outskirts of Dorchester and Roxbury, and the British have to flee Boston. And so this is a hugely important battle that we don't talk about enough. It takes place mostly on Breed's Hill, in classic misdirection. Bunker Hill is a little bit behind it. That's the high ground of Charleston, but Prescott has chosen to be, for some reason, on Breed's Hill, which is subject to British cannon fire. But it's, you know, these are young, inexperienced people on both sides. The British Army is very celebrated legions, but these are kids going up there. It's a hot day. They're completely exposed, and they're wearing red uniforms. And the Patriots just mow them down, attack after attack, and they lose. The British lose Pitcairn, who's the guy that has fired on the Patriots that are putting down their muskets and dispersing at Lexington Green. So many people claim to have fired the shot. And then Joseph Warren, who is the head of the Massachusetts Assembly, and the Brits considered the most sort of incendiary of the radicals, is also shot in the head. And he's stuffed in a hole, one British officer said, with a fellow rebel, and let their, you know, incendiary ideas, radical ideas die with them. It's horrible, and it's going to be the beginning, if Lexington and Concord weren't, of a horrible, you know, what will be 6 years, more than 6 years of fighting in this revolution.
You know, Ken Burns, you just mentioned the killing of the British commanding officer Pitcairn, and you said a number of people have claimed credit for that killing, which helped avoid the capture of the remaining Americans. What I read this morning is the person who was identified, and for purposes of this discussion, let's stay with him, is this guy Peter Salem, who is a black soldier. And as soon as I read that, my mind moved to what I'm sure everybody in the audience would move to, which was if the current administration was the editor of history, we'd never know about the Peter Salems of the world, because he's not a straight white guy. How much do you think about this erasure that's going on all around us and you?
You know, I have to control what I can control, and in this case, it's telling a good story. And it's true, the Black Americans fought for the British, and they fought for the rebels, probably 3/4 for the British and 1/4 for the rebels. Of those that were engaged in combat, about 20,000. 15, we think, fought with the British, because the British, in many cases, sort of cynically offered freedom. Their entire economy in the much richer Caribbean, 13 Caribbean colonies, not the 13 North American colonies, were all based on slavery. But many did, in fact, Jim and Marjorie, one of the most stunning statistics to me is there is a Mohegan woman, Rebecca Tanner, who lost 5 sons fighting the rebel cause. So if you think about Mrs. Sullivan in World War II, her 4 sons go down on a battleship. They make the rule that you got to separate families and brothers, and it gives us, by extension, Saving Private Ryan. Just think about Rebecca Tanner. Lost 5. I know of no losses greater for someone, all of whom were Native Americans fighting on behalf of the people who were also in the process of dispossessing their land, but felt that they had been intermixed and intermarried and part of colonial culture, just as many of the tribes on the western area, the nations on the western area, were also tended to go with the British because they saw anybody encroaching on their lands. They were called the hated Bostonians. Because they were hell-bent on taking their land. The story is so much more complicated, and Jim, to your question, when we reduce it to these simple binary things, black or white, gay or straight, male or female, you're lost. There's nothing binary. Everyone is complicated, from George Washington, the most important person. We don't have a country without him, who is flawed and rash and makes bad military decisions at times, but without him, we don't have a country. If he's captured or killed early on, we're speaking British or Spanish or French, depending on what happens after that. To all of these unsung people. You remember in the days of photographs, everybody's got a photograph, and now we take 10,000 of our selfies a day. But back then, 0.01% of the population had a portrait painted. So too many people like Rebecca Tanner are reduced to an existence of one line in some ledger, and you can see it as we pan it, lost 5 sons, and you're just taken aback. But we want to tell, and have always wanted to tell, a complete and complicated history.
We're talking to Ken Burns on the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, his spectacular documentary. We've seen pieces of it with his colleagues. The American Revolution comes out in November.
Well, one of many spectacular documentaries that Ken Burns has done, of course, is about the Civil War. And I think a lot of us think, okay, that was Americans fighting each other, the North and the South. But as you point out, that there were many Americans, many colonists, that were fighting with the British, and then there were the ones that were fighting with the rebels. So you had next door neighbors, forget one in Mississippi and one in Connecticut, that were on opposite sides, which is really...
That's exactly right. In fact, our Civil War is more of a sectional war.
Yeah.
Civil War implies great deaths among civilians, which doesn't happen in our Civil War except in Missouri and eastern Kansas. The greatest battle in the history of North America is Gettysburg, and 2 civilians die. 2.
Wow.
So this is not, at the Siege of Atlanta, fewer than 20. Siege of Vicksburg, I think it's under 10. So it's like we forget that what was happening in the American Revolution was people who were neighbors to one another, that loyalists, and we're calling balls and strikes here. A loyalist is understandable. We'd be what we'd call a conservative. They think quite correctly that the greatest system of government on earth to this moment is the British constitutional monarchy. My prosperity, my health, my family, all of this is due to that. Why would I want to change it for these crazy ideas that people are talking about? Independency? We're going to kill our parents? We're going to leave the mother country? What are you talking about? And this goes on and will be played out in particularly like states like New Jersey and South Carolina. You're going to see huge civilian deaths and lots of guerrilla action. Not dissimilar, I felt, to when we were in our working our Vietnam series, when we'd claim a province was pacified and then all of a sudden it wasn't pacified. That's what happened in New Jersey to the British. It's what happened in South Carolina to the British. And often a battle will have a British officer leading the loyalists, Ferguson at the Battle of King's Mountain, a Scotsman, and he's the only Brit there. Everybody else is an American killing Americans, and that's a very hard story to try to communicate. And there are a lot of people
who aren't choosing any side. They're what was called disaffected. They weren't sure where it was going to be. They're trying to keep their heads down. And so they were often the objects of suspicion of both the loyalists and the patriots. And so it's a complicated story that I just think, because we want to protect the great ideas, and those great ideas are not in any way diminished by the telling the accuracy of the violence that the United States, as the scholar Maya Jasanoff says at the opening of our third episode, was born in violence.
Well, you talk, I listened to your interview with Joe Rogan. I want to ask you about that in a second, because he's a very influential podcaster. But you were talking at different points about, the American Revolution, and those ideas coming together, combined with the ideas from Britain and the Enlightenment and all this, was kind of one of the greatest events ever in history. So expand upon that.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of in collision with a lot of stuff that I've been saying all along. History doesn't repeat itself, but maybe, as Mark Twain is supposed to have said, it rhymes. Ecclesiastes says, what has been done will be done again. What has been will be again. There's nothing new under the sun. And yet, actually, in the mid-1770s, there is something entirely new under the sun. Everybody up to that point had been a subject. At least a few people who lived in these 13 former colonies clinging to the eastern seaboard are something new, citizens. And that's been the great transformational thing. Jefferson says a few phrases after the famous second sentence, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. Let me translate. It's beautiful, but it means that everybody's been under the boot of an authoritarian, and now we tend to sort of yield to that. And now we're going to be something else. We're going to be citizens. That's going to require a lot of new things, responsibilities, virtue. We're going to pursue happiness, which is lifelong learning. These are all complicated things that are thrown out in the midst of this battle and changing allegiances and fortunes rising and falling and allies coming in and allies not helping and then allies do it. I mean, it's about as rip-snorting a story as I've ever come across.
Well, I wanted to ask you about Rogan, because as you know, a lot of people think that if Kamala Harris gone on the Joe Rogan show and millions and millions and millions of people listened to him, particularly young men, it might have changed the election. And when I listened to it, he had a lot of wows in there, doing a lot of wows. When you were talking about something. But you were talking a lot about what you just mentioned, virtue and character and authoritarianism. And I wonder if you think if you had any sense of what he made of that, listening. I mean, you schooled him in something that, school us all, because I don't know this stuff, obviously, like you do, but he got a real lesson, I bet, and heard things he'd not heard before.
I don't know about that. I think I think our tendency, which is very understandable, to set up everything in these binary opposites, red states, blue states, young, old, male, female, gay, straight, whatever it is we do, are all fraudulent. And then what it happens is that my whole thing, and perhaps I bored you with this before, is that I've had the great privilege of making films about the U.S., but also about us.
Yeah.
Right? And the only thing I know is that there's only us and no them. And so what I try to do, and why I'm so happy to go out and talk with Joe Rogan, is to just say, there is no them, and there's no schooling. He's a curious person. He's read a lot about a lot of these things. I heard a previous podcast that he did with a scholar, an 80-year-old scholar from our film that we did on the buffalo, and he clearly read every page of this scholarly book. And so I just think that we have to be so careful about, just as we do not wish to be written off, we want to, as Jim is saying, make sure that we tell the story of Black Americans who were engaged in the revolution in whatever context, and there are many engaged that day. And in our scene on Bunker Hill is an amazing thing about one of our young soldiers who's 14 years old, and he's joined the militia, is he suddenly realizes he's rushing up there, and he's now terrified. But then he sees a Negro man who's been shot in the neck, and all he wants is to get a plaster on it so he can go back to the battle. And that stiffens him, and now he's going to be resolved. Washington will get there a few weeks later on July 2nd. He'll arrive, and he'll go, black troops? What? No more. And then later on, he goes, you're right. They're good soldiers. So you get, as Jane Kaminsky, the former Harvard professor, says, you originally had the hard no of a Virginia planter, but he's willing to edit himself. He's willing to amend himself. He's willing to change, and that's what makes him George Washington and not every other Virginia planter.
Ken, can we spend the last minute or two where we started with your very valuable PSA? Susan Goldberg is going to join us for a few minutes, our boss, at the end of the next hour. I assume every listener knows the House voted 214 to 212 to not only eliminate a program that has saved the lives of millions and millions of people, PEPFAR, started by George W. Bush, but PBS and NPR is now sitting in the Senate. You've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of places. What's your sense of the dynamic here, the prospects?
So we sit in a big PBS NPR town, Boston, and there are people, but these stations are far more valuable to people in rural areas, right? Mm-hmm. PBS I'll focus on because I know more about it than the NPR side of it. But we are not just the children's stuff. We're not just the superb prime time. I mean, my goodness, Frontline has got to be the greatest show ever. But it's also continuing education, lifelong learning, crop reports, homeland security, emergency information. Sometimes it's the only signal that people get. And so while we can talk about Beacon Hill and we can talk about Upper West Side and Nob Hill, the system, which is a bottom-up system, is actually serving people in rural areas and is a part of their lives in a much greater component. And I think we're cutting off our nose to spite our face with this thing. It may have some sort of instantaneous ideological satisfaction, but let's remember William F. Buckley was, the most important conservative in the history of the United States.
3 decades.
Had 32, if not 33 years of a program called Firing Line, which still continues with a conservative there. So I just think that the ideological arguments are mislaid and the damage done. PBS will survive, but what about the 330 PBS stations all around the country? So many of them get most of the money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We'll survive. It'll be a big hit, and we'll figure out what to do. But what happens to the new filmmaker who's coming up? And what if that new filmmaker has a conservative voice? There's a home for them on PBS. Always has been and always will be. That's the short-sightedness that is at the heart of this kind of binary, my way or the highway philosophy.
So are you troubled, we only have a minute left, are you troubled by the fact you're retelling American history with a brilliant passion? You're talking about the importance of PBS, and your dog is playing dead over your left shoulder, totally asleep. Does that bother you?
Jim, he has been through so many battles. If you knew from not the Civil War, but Vietnam, he's lived through he fought through Vietnam.
That's
and
right.
He fought through the American Revolution. This is Chester.
Hello, Chester.
He's, hurry up and wait. That's what we say in the Army, right? It's mostly waiting, and then it's just sheer terror for a second. So let's cut him a break. Let's let him have his R&R.
Absolutely.
And do that. Yeah.
Happy Bunker Hill Day, Ken Burns.
Happy Bunker Hill Day.
Yeah.
Really excited about the film. November, as we say, right here on PBS. Looking forward to it. Ken, be well. We'll talk to you soon.
And Chester, thank you for your service to your country. We very much appreciate it. There he is. Oh, my goodness. Hi, Chester. Look right at us.
Join or die.
Thank you, Ken Burns.
Thanks
We've
so
been
much.
speaking with Ken Burns, a filmmaker, and with Sarah Botstein behind the American Revolution documentary series out in November. Jim and I have had a chance to watch some of it. It is fantastic. For more information about events, go to pbs.org/Ken Burns/The American Revolution. Okay, the show's going to continue here in Boston. For you listening on NAPM, thanks for tuning in. We're leaving, but you can tune in at 3 o'clock to the fabulous 413. Monty and Khalees head to Dickinson Farm in Granby to talk about farming and strawberry season. In Boston, BPR continues on GBH 89.7 with our own farm news about in urban farming, and a lot other information about good, clean food, plus Trenni Casey, GBH President and CEO Susan Goldberg, and Boston Mayor Michelle Wu is going to be with us between 1 and 2 o'clock this afternoon. You're listening to 89.7 GBH. I am Marjorie Egan. He is Jim Browdy. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, and we are streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We'll be right back after the noontime news.
You're listening to Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. Just ahead, more smart conversation about what's going on in our community. Stay with us here on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And Bridgewater State University, helping create jobs for Massachusetts. BSU's skilled graduates are recruited by today's industry leaders, elevating business in Boston and beyond. bridgew.edu/elevate. The tale of dinosaurs is one of struggle, love, and survival, the ultimate ancient drama. The stunning 6-part series Walking with Dinosaurs continues with back-to-back episodes tonight at 8 on GBH2.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Jim Browdy, ahead on Hour 2 of BPR Live from the Boston Public Library. From 1 to 2 today, it's Boston Mayor Michelle Wu for Ask the Mayor. But first this hour, local farmers Ken Rapoport from Azuluna Foods and Christopher Grallert from Green City Growers join for a conversation about what state leaders and everyday consumers can do to improve local food options.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then it's our Tuesday Sports Check-In with NBC Sports Boston anchor and reporter Trenni Casey. And as Congress moves closer to clawing back over $1 billion in already allocated funding, what would rescission mean for PBS and NPR? We'll ask our boss, GBH President and CEO, Susan Goldberg. It's all next on the second hour of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump says he is seeking, quote, a real end to Iran's nuclear ambitions. But NPR's Mara Leisen reports it's not yet clear how Trump plans to accomplish that.
Israel wants U.S. military help to destroy Iran's underground nuclear facility, but Trump campaigned on keeping the U.S. out of foreign wars. On his way home from the G7 meeting in Canada, Trump told reporters he may send Vice President Vance and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to negotiate with Iran's foreign minister. Asked to explain his social media post calling on Tehran's citizens to evacuate, Trump said, quote, there's a lot of bad things happening there. Trump also said he didn't think Iran would strike U.S. assets in the region because of the risk of retaliation.
I think they know not to touch our troops.
Are you sending
We'll find out.
Trump has repeatedly said his bottom line is that Iran must never get a nuclear weapon. Mara Liasson, NPR News.
The Department of Homeland Security is denying reports it has paused immigration raids at any work sites. Spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin says the policy of arresting criminals and other people in the U.S. without legal status still stands. Last week, the New York Times reported Immigration and Customs Enforcement advised its officers to largely pause raids and arrests of migrants employed by farms, hotels, and restaurants after a social media post in which President Trump appeared to soften his stance. A second patient has died after receiving a controversial gene therapy for muscular dystrophy. NPR's Rob Stein reports a company that makes his treatment says it's examining what happened.
Sarepta Therapeutics of Cambridge, Massachusetts, says the patient with Duchenne muscular dystrophy died from acute liver failure. The death marks the second patient who died from liver failure after receiving the gene therapy. In response, the company says it has temporarily stopped shipping the treatment for some patients while officials assess the situation. The deaths have focused attention again on the decision by the Food and Drug Administration to quickly approve the treatment 2 years ago, despite some concerns about the first gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Rob Stein, NPR News.
West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey says on X that floods over the weekend in his state are now responsible for a 7th death. We have more from NPR's Giles Snyder.
West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey calls the flooding Mother Nature at its worst. Heavy rain Sunday led to the partial collapse of an apartment building in Fairmont and damaged roads and bridges. No one was killed there, but about an hour and a half away in the Wheeling area in the state's northern panhandle. Authorities have identified 6 victims. Crews are going door to door and searching cars caught up in floodwaters.
That's NPR's Giles Snyder reporting. This is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell today announced that all 55 attorneys general representing all eligible states in the U.S. territories have agreed to sign on to a $7.4 billion settlement with Purdue Pharma and its owners, the Sackler family. This is over its involvement in creating what's called the worst opioid crisis across the country. The Sacklers will pay $1.5 billion, and Purdue will pay roughly $900 million in the first payment expected early next year. Subsequent payments will be $500 million after 1 year, an additional $500 million after 2 years, and then $400 million after 3 years. The settlement still needs the court's approval. The Sackler family has also informed the attorneys general of its plan to proceed forward with this settlement. And in 2 weeks from today, on July 1st, Massachusetts will get a new commissioner of education. He is Pedro Martinez. No, he's not that Pedro Martinez. He's no stranger, though, to controversy as a schools leader. The Globe reports that Martinez, who has battled elected officials in Nevada, Texas, and Illinois, says he will not back down from Massachusetts officials if he thinks he's acting in the best interests of the state's students. In sports, Red Sox try to make it 7 in a row tonight, 7 wins in a row, that is, when they play Game 2 of their series with the Mariners in Seattle. Florida Panthers can win the Stanley Cup tonight with a win over the Oilers. 72 degrees in Boston. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance. Progressive is looking for individuals in a variety of career fields who want to help build a culture of inclusiveness. More information, including application, at progressive.com/careers.
Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio. Jim Brady and Marjorie Egan. We are broadcasting, thank you, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're taking the day off tomorrow. Well, we're going to our staff retreat tomorrow, so we're going to do a replay, best of show. We'll be back on Friday. Mayor Wu is going to join us from 1 to 2 today to take our questions and yours, and Governor Maura Healey will be with us June 25th. Hello again, Jim.
Now, before I introduce our next guest, I have to say there is a groundswell of support for Marjorie's candidacy.
That's right.
It is amazing. Can we put up, here it is, vote Marge. Ranked choice candidacy.
There we go.
Can you put that up again, please? Governor, Senator, Brookline Town Manager.
Okay.
She doesn't care. Excuse me, Marjorie. I'm trying to help your campaign. Move slowly, live a long time, die very slowly. Suddenly. I'm sorry. Suddenly.
May I just add something?
Yeah.
I don't know why this happens to me. We were lucky enough to have a picture in Boston Magazine.
That was from Boston Magazine about 48 years ago. That's right.
They're adding cleavage to those photographs, which I do not have.
No, I actually asked for the cleavage
never
on
wanted
AI.
To have it.
I did.
I would not show up at something that low cut in the office. I just want you to know that is photoshopped. That's not me.
So if you could text us, do you want to run for governor, for senator, for Brookline Town Manager? What's your preference? But we're really pulling this baby together here.
Okay.
Earlier this year, we did a call-in segment about frozen foods, the delight of a pizza roll and the sort of yuck of mushy green peas. Well, Darren, one of the hosts of the Froze Bros, which we had never heard of, a local frozen food podcast, called into BPR during that call-in segment. Here's Darren.
We do share some real information, get some, we just did some trends and predictions for the year ahead in frozen food. We try something in each podcast. What we've also done is sort of gimmicky segments. Some of the stuff you talked about, like freezing Twinkies or Ho-Hos, or nuts or chips, making popsicles out of various different things, and then just seeing how it turns out frozen.
One of the most thoughtful calls we've ever received. Well, one of our next guests was listening and took umbrage at our critique of frozen foods. That's because he sells bone broth and local pasture-raised meat products that are frozen at the peak of freshness and nutrition. We've since had them, and they are fabulous. That would be Ken Rapoport. He's the co-founder and CEO at Azuluna Foods. Ken, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for being here. Also joining us is Christopher Grallert. He's the CEO of Green City Growers, which builds and supports urban gardens throughout the city, greater Boston. They've teamed up with Azuluna to promote agricultural literacy in schools. We'll talk about that, school gardens, and community livestock farming. Chris, great to have you too. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Well, let's start with you, Ken, because I did have your bone broth earlier this year, and I think I've never had such elastic skin, you know. It's been unbelievable. But elaborate on what you said. What is Azuluna? Tell us about it.
You know, Azuluna was actually interesting, created almost 20 years ago by grant money from Ted Kennedy and Joe Lieberman to Tufts University. And it was to create more farms in New England, to create more regionalization, and to create a connection between the urban dweller and the and where their food comes from. So what Azuluna today has become, really, we took it over in 2018. It combines regenerative agriculture with culinary arts and nutritional science to make food that's good for the individual, strengthens the community, and helps heal the planet.
We're going to talk about regenerative agriculture in a minute, and you'll explain it to us. Tell us about Green City Growers there, Chris.
Sure. So Green City Growers designs, installs, and maintains on-site food production. We manage over 180 sites currently, an unbelievable, crazy feat. I can't believe we've done it. It's very complicated. And the idea is to create agricultural literacy, build capacity around local food systems. You know, we're generally 3 to 5 generations. Everybody here is removed from the farm by multiple generations. And how do we bring people closer to food system and food production again?
One of your sites, correct me if I'm wrong, is in Fenway Park. And actually, Linda Henry was on our show about a decade ago,
Oh, wow.
and she's talking about this thing, and then we finally got to visit. How many thousands of pounds do you generate there of fruits, vegetables, whatever?
So last year we did just over 6,000 pounds. We've made some improvement this year to get it even higher. So super exciting.
Yeah, on the roof of Fenway Park.
10-year anniversary this year.
Happy anniversary. It's great.
Wow. So you mentioned before regenerative agriculture, Ken, and it's controversial in some quarters in terms of the planet. But what does it mean?
To me, it's really about making the soil healthy, like regeneration in the soil. That's where your food comes from. So essentially, you're putting microorganisms and all the minerals and things. So you're not really using a lot of chemicals, right? So they're using cover crops. And the healthier the soil is, the healthier the plants coming out of it are, and the healthier the animals and nutrient dense.
What's cover crop?
Cover crops are any kind of crops there's a variety of different things that basically, following when they're plowing things up and the growers grow, they'll plow it up so that basically they'll seed it again, so that essentially it absorbs carbon. Again, it's holding the soil. And you'll going out west, you'll see land that has no cover crops and is completely brown. And then you'll see areas that are completely green. And what's interesting, often people kind of yell at the larger companies like General Mills and Pepsi, people you wouldn't think are necessarily concerned about that. They're now paying farmers to put cover crops in because it's really one of the easiest things you can do to reduce climate change.
And where is this going on?
Really all through the U.S. I mean, you go out west.
Around the world.
Yeah.
Around the world, yeah.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I think of urban farming, I think of more of urban planting, because you drive around Boston, you see, like in the Fenway, they have that great garden, and they have different gardens around the city. But if you want to be an urban farmer, how big a space are we talking about here? Do we go up on our own roofs if they're flat roofs and do it there?
Absolutely. Why not? Anywhere, you'd really be surprised because we're not flying to the moon here. We might be curing cancer, but
let's hope so.
It's taking things maybe where they historically haven't been grown, and growing them, like on the rooftop of the most famous baseball park in the United States, for example. But agriculture is very complex, right? Food, feed, fiber, fuel. And I think oftentimes, really urban agriculture is about fruits and vegetables mostly.
Yes.
We're not going to be growing grains on, very expensive real estate in an urban place. But it's also about taking expertise, what we call domain expertise, or what Ken and I, when we talk about agricultural literacy and capacity building, because we all want a local food system, right? I think everybody from wherever you come or wherever side, I've heard a lot of political talk here this morning, and just people can agree that we want local food system. And, you know, we have to teach domain expertise in that. And that's what we try to do at Green City Growers. We try to teach real expertise so we can increase the quantities of actual nutrient-dense and high-quality food that's grown in a hyper-local situation.
Why do we care that it's grown in a hyper-local situation?
It's what unites humanity, isn't it? Isn't it, Jim? What brings us, it's one of the highest forms of intimacy is food and connecting over food and through food, and we begin to understand how much more alike we are than different when we're talking about growing food.
And I think what's important is, right, I think that less than 5% of the food that we consume here is produced here in New England. And so one of the things we talk about, and that's why Green City Growers and Azuluna have worked together in an educational program, right? Because Derry Mazafarian, who was at Friedman School, talked about it took us 50 years to get this.
This is the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, Policy, whatever that is.
Correct,
Yeah.
right. And so it's really about how do we get to the next stage of where we need to go.
Yeah, I want to talk about that education. I assume it's not just for young people, but also for consumers. I mean, we really need to know what we're talking about so we make the right. No, I'm serious. I mean, I assume I speak for almost everybody here. Before we do, though, I totally forgot my question. So let's go to that for a second. What's the educational work you guys are doing, Ken?
Well, what we're really doing, Chris and I have to work together. So what we'll start is we actually have built an online nutritional program that you can actually self-paced to go through it, and we've been giving out to teachers and schools. And when we look regionally, right, because I think you have this big mass of people all the way from Washington to Boston, it's self-paced education on nutrition. Then we're putting incubators in school to actually see the birth of chickens, and then be able to follow that whole life cycle until you're growing them. Then you get with hydroponics and vertical raised beds so they get their hands in dirt. And then the other piece that we're looking at is where they actually community livestock farming. So we're trying to get 50 to 75 birds, which is incredibly small. But then we're saying, okay, you have 2 preschoolers, you have 2 elementary schools, you have 2 middle schools, and I have 2 high schools. We'll come out and participate in raising these chickens for 6 weeks. They're slow growth birds. There's a unique brand. You know, I don't want to get into different types of chickens, but we use a Pioneer brand, which is a slow growth bird. And then you get to see, you commit to showing up 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon for a week during the summer, which kind of bridges between essentially your spring and your fall semester during the summer. And then you all show back up to when we're taking them together to take them off to processing. And you get questions. Marjorie says, Dad, how come, what's happening? Well, we've honored your chicken. We've grown it. We've taken care of it. As part of, if we don't take care of it, then basically the bird dies. We're also, Marjorie or Jim, we have to work as part of a community. It's our week. So then we take care of it. And then you see life and death. And it's an important part of not just, part of, we're really raising agricultural literacy is really growing in New England. We can only produce so much.
First of all, before you continue, where do we find these lessons? You said they're online. Where are they online?
They're basically with azulunafoods.com and azulunafarms.com.
AZULUNA Foods. Yeah.
Like once in a blue moon. So we joke around, once in a blue moon we're coming in. And Chris and I both had successful careers outside of this, and now we're sort of giving back. And I feel like with all the chaos in the world, this is something that can really have an impact.
Yeah.
And we're working, what's interesting, our kitchen is at Johnson Wales University. The founding dean is Dean Evans, and basically comes from an agricultural background, running the first dean that's non-culinary, running a food. So unique, right? You're connecting farm with actually the food.
Chris, I interrupted you. What were you going to say there?
Okay. We actually work extensively with the Boston Public School System, and we are in over half of all of their schools teaching, ag-based curriculum. So for me, for example, I did very poorly with adulting as a kid, except I grew up working on a farm. That's where I felt smart. That's where I felt successful. That's where I felt included. And I know that there's other kids like that are learning in a different way. So when they go out and see a super impactful garden with heads of lettuce that look like what they're coming out of the supermarket, they can be inspired, and there's hope. And they also know that if they fail, they can try again, because it's a process and not necessarily an end goal all the time. So we have curriculum, STEM-tied curriculum, pre-K through 12. We also have adult wellness curriculum, and we also work in senior living communities with all the ranges of, independent living, assisted living, and memory care.
Well, I think RFK Jr. is crazy about vaccines, but I do think he's right about the bad stuff that we eat and the processed foods and the chemicals and the pesticides and all that. Actually, Michelle Obama talked about this years ago,
Sure.
but she got trashed when she did. But he's
The garden at the White House.
The garden at the White House.
Partnership
But
for a Healthy America.
He's talking about that, and I find that very appealing, except for the fact that I fear you get nowhere because the lobbying from these big pharmaceutical,
I always say I'm just a farm boy, and I don't know a lot about what's going on there, but I can tell you that there's a huge, certainly the nutritional piece, but there's also a magical and healing piece about working with the earth and in a garden and together with others. It's uniting. It creates community. The farmers meet and share their wares just like they did, 100 years ago at Quincy Market. Came in and traded there and met and built community. And I know Ken feels very strongly about this as well.
Yeah, you wanted to say something.
No, I was going to say what's interesting is that for your listeners, one of the most important things you can do, there's 4 different things you could probably do that will have a major impact on your health. It may not make you live longer like your timeline, but hydration. Most people, you hydrate. So most people don't know how much to hydrate. You basically take your body weight, split it in half. That's how many ounces you need.
Oh, is that it? I didn't know that.
I mean, everyone should know that. And then if you can add in some bone broth, doesn't have to be bone broth.
How much bone broth? He cut that in half with the bone broth. It's so good.
Yeah, so
he's got my partner Pam addicted to the bone broth.
It is really good.
But because it's good, that's good for good for your gut health, your microbiomes, so you have immunity system is raised, skin elasticity, and joint inflammation. And again, hydrate. Stay away from ultra processed foods. Stay away from refined sugars. And if you can eat organic and regenerative, yes, but eat clean. And honestly, those 4 things can have a major impact on cost.
When you say eat clean, you mean?
Well, what I'm saying is that try not to eat things that have chemicals in it. And I know it's ultra processed.
Highly processed foods.
Yeah. Okay, as I'm right next to me is an Italian sub from the Newsfeed Cafe.
Semi-highly
Everything that he is not talking about.
There you go.
So it's delicious. Well, you could show us in a minute what you have.
Oh my God, there's the bone broth.
But before you get to this, I actually thought of my question a minute ago. You mentioned that I think it was only Ken. You mentioned 5% of what we eat is grown locally. What percentage could it get to if people subscribe to the thinking of you and Chris?
I guess the answer would be more, but there are certain things that we probably will never go back to having large agriculture here because the cost of land.
What could we do that we don't do enough of? What are the kinds of things that could be done locally that are given short shrift?
Well, certainly produce. We have very rich soils around here, and using the right type of products, we can grow very different soils. There's a lot of areas, because everything's broken up. Even though livestock farming, what I deal with, I have 20 acres here, I have 50 acres here, I have 20. So I have to transport the animals. There's not contiguous land. That's why what Azuluna does, we do broilers. We do about 8,000 broilers, which is a large amount for New England, but very small. We do 1,700 layers. Those are doing for eggs. We do about 200 pigs in cycles, not all at one place. And then we do about 125 lambs. And then we take all that and we try to take value-added products to be able to make food that's nutrient and good for you.
I think Ken and I diverge a little bit. I'm a bit more, sort of anything's possible, but it's a great balance.
Well, tell us what is possible.
I think we can do a lot. And I think technology, and I think looking at circularity, everybody wants to move away from a petrochemical economy. What are we doing currently with waste, for example? We're burying it or burning it. Why are we not circling that back into the food system again as fertilizer and other energy uses? We can create all the ancillary businesses that come around it. Look, I'm a never-die sort of person, and I will never stop believing that we can bring a significant portion of our agricultural production back to the Northeast. Ken, with livestock, energy conversion is a bit different, but I do believe with new technologies in energy, heating poultry houses and things like that can be more significant. But, we're never going to have a grain economy. I don't think we're growing wheat. It's cheap enough to bring it in by rail, and these sorts of things.
So, by the way, just as an example, I was just thinking as you were talking, I don't know about your kids. My kids, who are city girls, 2 now 30-year-old women, went to the farm school when they were little kids. One of the best times they ever had in their whole life, and they are really city kids, and they just loved it.
That's awesome.
So is there anything, we spend most of our cottage industry here is bad-mouthing the legislature. for their 5-month vacations and doing, as the Globe says today or yesterday, the lowest achieving legislature in the first few months of the year in America. Is there something Beacon Hill that could be doing to encourage, for example, these education programs for kids, which I love?
Ken and I will completely agree on the fact that consumers drive everything, and that's why we are commercial enterprises. They will decide, and industry will support that. And policy needs to be created, for example, for the real estate industry to incentivize green infrastructure. Really, for every square foot of on-site food production, there's a tax abatement or other.
So they could do that. Obviously, that's something they could do.
And there's people really, really interested in it in the real estate industry, but it's very challenging and it's very profit-driven.
And get them to regionalize, because you've got Massachusetts,
Right.
You've got Connecticut, Rhode Island. There's sometimes, again, that was Ted Kennedy, Joe Lieberman 20 years ago, and you're still working, and sometimes trying to move a sheep from Connecticut to Maine is very difficult. But I think one thing I would say is that industry can get behind this. I met the former CEO of Campbell's Soup at one of the Food Innovation Council, of which we're a founding member of. And she comes up, Ken, I love what you're doing. Yeah, this is perfect. We made healthy food 20 years ago. Nobody bought it. So the consumer, individual responsibility, people need, once they get educated and they go, that dollar's got to be good for me, number one, right? You're going to be good. Then it's got to strengthen the community. Then it's going to help the planet. And that's possible.
Right.
That is so, and ABM, Smithfield, General Mills,
Yes.
will all turn.
Archer Daniels,
Once the
Midland,
consumer
Cargill,
gets educated and demands that, they will do it.
Speaking of healthy food, what'd you bring? Let's get down to brass tacks here. What'd you have?
Bone broth.
So bone broth.
My skin elasticity is going to improve.
This
overnight.
is amazing. Crafted at Johnson Wales University with the best chefs in the world down there. It's amazing. I mean, this thing has like 25.
That's for Marjorie. She'll draw. What else you got?
We got some bacon for you there.
Oh
you know,
my God!
And we
this
actually
is really good for you too, by the way.
No, well, actually very lean, right? So
Very
it's
lean.
very healthy. And when you cook that, you'll see very little fat. We brought some. These are regenerative eggs, basically pasture raised. They get moved around the field, higher omega-3s, and we bought basically 30 cartons. We brought 30 items.
Are you giving things to the audience?
Later on, you can give it to, yes, it's to the audience.
What a guy.
Hey, I know. And so
all they care about is free stuff. They don't give a damn about what you're talking about.
And not like you two, right? Not at all.
Exactly.
I love free stuff.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I know. And we did some breakfast sausage. So they could pick one and one each. And then we actually have some bags that we recycle from. Again, we're all about sustainability. This company went out of business.
How do people find you?
Through azulunafoods.com and azulunafarms.com.
How about you?
Want to say something real quick.
How about you?
Wait.
Let's find out where do we find Green City Grocers?
Green City Growers.
.com.
That's
I just want to say real quick, you think about going to Fenway Park, you think of eating pizza and you know those sausage things you always get. But
they're called sausages.
Whatever
actually.
they are. But you have the food that's being grown on the roof of Fenway Park, you can also get in your food when
Absolutely.
you go
So
to Fenway
about
Park.
70% of every, asparagus to zucchini.
Okay, asparagus to zucchini.
You know, it's really, so they're using it all in the food service concession. It's super exciting for the chef because they're really involved in the crop planting and everything. But let's not leave out that Fenway, the Boston Red Sox also donate a huge component to local food impact organizations at Fenway. Everybody can see it, so it really shows what's possible in an urban setting. When you take a tour of Fenway, they pass right by the rooftop farm.
So I can get some asparagus at Fenway Park if I go there.
Well, maybe. What's B? That's beets.
Broccoli?
Beets.
Beets.
Beets and broccoli for sure.
Beets and broccoli,
Beets and broccoli.
Gentlemen, it's great to see you both. Thanks. Great to meet you, Chris. Ken, great to see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all your great work. Really appreciate you coming in. And thank you for the food.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with Ken Rapoport, the co-founder and CEO at Azuluna Foods, and Christopher Grallert. He is the CEO of Green City Growers, and they've got that huge growing all the fruits and vegetables on the roof of Fenway Park, which is pretty neat. Coming up after this quick NBC Sports Boston anchor reporter Trenni Casey. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Trusted, local news.
President Trump wants to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from the National Park Service budget this year.
GBH News.
A city council meeting in Worcester came to an abrupt ending after more than 50 protesters showed up.
Here for what matters to you.
Mayor Michelle Wu signed an executive order demanding more transparency from ICE when it makes immigration arrests in Boston.
GBH 89.7, online at gbhnews.org.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Mass General Brigham Health Plan, insurance coverage from healthcare experts for businesses, individuals, families, and retirees. Mass General Brigham Health Plan. Learn more at mgbhp.org/everyday. And American Repertory Theater, with the hit musical rom-com Two Strangers Carry a Cake Across New York. The Boston Globe calls it clever, funny, and delightfully surprising. Now playing. amrep.org.
Welcome back to BPR. I'm Jim Browdy. She's Marjorie Egan. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. The mayor will join us in exactly 35 minutes for an hour of Ask the Mayor, live at the library. The governor joins us on June 25th for an hour from 11 to noon. We're joined now at the library desk by Trenni Casey, anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston, and a BPR contributor. Hello there, Trenni.
Hi, guys. Hi, Trenni Casey. So Jim Browdy pays more attention to baseball than I do, but apparently
Love baseball.
Is this a controversial trade with Rafael Devers, their best hitter? Was this controversial? Was this the right thing to do to improve their financial flexibility?
Yeah, that's a really nice way of polishing a turd.
Yeah.
Lovely way to put it. Thank you.
No, we're gonna have more
beautiful.
Financial flexibility. No, what you're doing is you're dumping salary.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't follow the comings and goings of the Red Sox, they on Sunday in a shocking move. After sweeping the Yankees and getting into a playoff position. Yes, that's a positive thing.
Those are the same people that are supporting Marjorie for governor, by the way.
That's right.
They are wild women over there. But go ahead.
I like that.
I know. You didn't know.
I do like Maura, though. Let's not,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, she told me she's ready to step aside in a few more years, and I'll just slip right
She'll
in.
run for select person in Brookline if that doesn't work out.
All
So
right,
go ahead.
great.
Keep going.
So Rafael Devers is the team's best hitter. He is their highest paid player. He makes $313 million a year. He is
not a year.
Sorry,
over 10 years.
Over 10 years. Sorry, thank you, Jim. $313
That's
million
right,
over
only
10
$30
years.
million a year. Only
30, a little over 30.
year.
Honestly, that's just the going rate for a good pro athlete now.
Yeah.
Like that's just it is what it is, right? So the hullabaloo started when Tristan Cassis blew out his knee earlier in the season. And some thought maybe Rafael Devers, who was actually the hullabaloo started in spring training in February when the Red Sox signed Alex Bregman to a deal to play third base and never talked to Rafael Devers about it. They just said, we signed this guy. Now you're not going to play third base anymore. You're going to be the designated hitter.
Oh.
Devers was mad about it in spring training. He said, no, I'm not a DH. I'm a third baseman. Finally relented and was like, fine, I'll be a DH. They told him that he wouldn't have to play in the field. So then Cassis gets hurt. He says, I'm not playing in the field. You told me I didn't have to play in the field. Then Alex Bregman, the guy they signed to replace Rafael Devers at third, he gets hurt. Some people think, okay, maybe Devers will play a little bit at third base. Nope. He's not going to do that either. John Henry flies to Kansas City to try and have a conversation with Rafael Devers. That doesn't work. He's still only DHing. But all this time while he's only DHing, he is next to Shohei Ohtani, probably the second best hitter in the American League.
Oh, wow.
He's hitting just under 300. He's hitting like 272, 275 on the year, 15 home runs. I think like a tick under 50 RBI or just around 50 RBI already for the year. And while people knew that he wasn't being the best teammate in the world, he was still doing his job, and the team was no worse for the wear. They had won going into the 5 straight games. So they get on a plane to go to Seattle on Sunday afternoon, and before the plane takes off, somebody gets on. The whole team's there. All of a sudden, Rafael Devers is getting up. He's saying goodbye, and they put him in a white taxi cab back to Fenway. They've traded him to the San Francisco Giants.
Oh, my God.
Like, they couldn't even get him a car service.
Are you okay with this, or are you disappointed in the trade?
Well, I just don't know why you would haul somebody off the plane at the last moment like that.
Who knows? And the crazy thing is they're going, so they play San Francisco this weekend.
I know that.
So it should be great. It's just, to me, it's you can, again, polishing a turd. You can present it any way you want, that this is what's best for the team in the long term and blah, 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 blah. It's not. It's just saving your owner money so that he can go invest it in his little soccer team across the pond and Liverpool.
First of all, you're only allowed to say turd 3 times in one segment, so you only have one more left.
Okay, great.
Here is Red Sox president and CEO Sam Kennedy last night at a press conference trying to explain this whole thing.
We obviously, over the last week or so, reached an inflection point, and as difficult as that inflection point was, as the hallmark of this organization, I guess, over the last 24 years, we acted boldly and decisively And we came to the very difficult decision to make a deal that we think serves the best interests of the Boston Red Sox in the short term and in the long term.
Now, one of the problems is the people at the library, nobody's paying attention because they're giving out free eggs.
Yes.
So try to refocus
are
if
these
you can.
Farm fresh eggs?
Yes, they are.
They
Okay,
are.
can I say one thing before? I want to move on from this because I want to lose people. But I am in the minority. I don't think it's for any of the reasons. Most people agree with you. I think what happened, without giving people a headache who are not baseball fans, the guy makes $30 million a year. They say, we want you to play first base. No. Want you to play third base. No. If we had a person on our staff here who said, I'm going to do my job, I don't want to help anybody else with theirs or make our show better, I wouldn't be crazy about that person being here.
We don't play baseball, and you know what?
We don't play baseball.
And you
It's a
know
very
what?
good
We don't
point.
play sports, and also to use a media, I guess a media example. Who's the biggest? Well, I'll go with Mike Felger because I think
Yes.
Michael Felger is probably one of the biggest media names.
Sports Hub in the
Sports Hub
afternoon.
in the afternoons. The guy, almost everybody who pays any attention to sports knows exactly who he is. He doesn't want to do something. He doesn't have to do it because he's Mike Felger. He gets the highest ratings. He does. If you're the best of the best at what you do, Stephen A. Smith at ESPN, he gets paid oodles more money than anybody else.
We used to work at a radio station. The most popular host on the station by far was fired because he was not playing by rules.
Well,
in any
but
case,
I think that's the exception,
Did you give away
not the
my
rule.
bean broth? Where's my bone broth?
I'm holding on
I
to it.
just
Don't
wanna make
worry
sure
about
I still have it.
The
Wow.
deal we worked out as soon as you announced your candidacy, we'll give you the broth. We're going to move on here. So Devers is huge, but the trade, I would argue even bigger, is that Joey Chestnut is back in the Nathan's hot dog eating competition. After, for those who don't know, he skipped a year. He was actually tossed last year, even though he won like 9 in a row. Why was he not allowed to participate last year?
He was not allowed to participate last year because one of his big sponsors is Impossible Foods, which is a plant-based hot dog.
Uh-oh.
And of course, it is the Nathan's hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July at Coney Island. Nathan's is not plant-based.
Correct.
Nathan's is all the innards that are normally in a hot dog.
All the innards.
And so they said that he couldn't participate, and they had a new champion. I don't remember who it was. Doesn't matter because Joey Chestnut is back this year. They've reconciled their differences, and he will be participating in this year's hot dog eating contest on Coney Island. He could win a record 17th time.
So I have a quick question for both of you. Is there anything more disgusting on television
No.
than watching people eat 78 hot dogs?
Well, and the grossest part about it is they dip it. So
Water.
They dip it in water because obviously that makes the bread soft and it makes it easier to eat. Because you have to. It's not just eating the hot dog. You have to eat the hot dog and the bun. So you have to dip it in. And I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they don't gag. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what their cholesterol levels are and all of their other blood work. I would love to see it.
Trenni, for about 20 years, I covered the hot dog
You
eating
did?
contest.
Oh, in the
East
North End?
Boston.
Oh, in East Boston?
Or was it the North End or East
Sausage.
Boston?
It was a sausage
Well,
eating.
it depends. Sometimes
Oh.
it was hot. Usually it was hot dogs.
How was
But
that?
it'd
Great?
be like 90 degrees. It'd be so humid. You'd be packed. It was like you made you sick to your
Do you
stomach.
know what always reminds me of? You know that movie Stand By Me?
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh, when they're
Great
eating the
movie, When
pie.
they're eating the pie and then
Yeah.
there's the castor oil. I mean, it's just, it's
Okay.
so gross.
Thank you. Nicely
Okay,
put.
let's move on from that. Let's.
I'm very eloquent today.
No, you are.
No, that
You have
that
one
was-
more, you know what, left
Yep.
before you're expelled from the show
From the
here.
show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way to lead into the classy mayor.
There was this guy, J.J. Spawn. I guess he wasn't doing very well at the beginning of the U.S. Open. He ended up winning this. But we have and it was a big deal. And we have some great sound from this winning putt. You can hear the audio from the USGA broadcast the moment it happened and how loud.
You got to set this up, though, a little bit
Okay,
more
go
than
ahead.
there. This guy, apparently, to win the tournament after a horrible start.
Yep.
He's only won one tournament ever.
A horrible start to the fourth day. He was
To the fourth day, yeah.
He was in the lead
Okay.
after day one. I think he was like in the top 3 after day 2. So he was right there at the top of the leaderboard. But he fell apart on Sunday before coming back to win.
Okay, so he's got like a 72-foot putt.
And
And
he
he's
was
got to get down in 2 or 60-something, in 2 shots to win the tournament. And there you go, Marjorie. You can introduce the rest of it.
Okay, here it is, and how loud it is, compared to the usual hush, hush, hush of the broadcasting of golf tournaments, taking a chip shot on the 19th hole. Well, here it is.
Don't need to make it. 2 putts.
I love that.
Unlikely final round Sundays in U.S. Open history. J.J. Spawn closes the deal with a birdie at the last.
My attitude is there's nothing duller than watching golf on TV. I watched this video about 18 times. It is so exciting.
Hold on for a second. You know, do you ever watch the British baking show? Very soothing,
of course.
very slow.
It's like golf.
It's green. It's like golf. My son was home. My newlywed son was home this weekend, and he was watching this golf game. And it's the same thing. It's very quiet. Everybody's very quiet until something like this. It's like the British baking show. Everything.
You can't eat the golf ball though.
No,
That's
but
the
everything
difference.
is really green. Everything is really quiet. I can see where people get into it. It's soothing.
It is
something.
Well, it's not soothing if you play it. It's infuriating.
Yeah,
if you play.
but you watch them out there, and they've got these great swings, and they're great athletes.
I personally, I like golf. I like going to golf tournaments.
Yeah.
I think it's I'm terrible at it. I'm trying to learn how to be a golfer. But the theater of it is great, especially the majors. Like, let's be honest, if you're just watching kind of like a smaller, tournament
Not
on
very
a
exciting.
random
Yeah.
weekend, I can see if you're not a huge golf fan how it's not exciting. But we've had the PGA Championship with Scottie Scheffler was like okay because you kind of expect him to win. But between the Masters and Rory McIlroy finally winning the Masters,
that was
and
pretty
then
cool.
JJ Spawn's like a mid-30s guys, which is sort of toiling and working his way up.
I like that.
It's a great story. It's somebody who has just put his nose to the grindstone and found a way to not dominate but tame a very difficult course. He was the only golfer to finish under par. Everybody else was even or over par. This was an incredibly difficult golf course and made more difficult by the conditions. It rained a lot. In fact, the final round was
they
delayed
had to interrupt it. And what did they play during the interruption? They played Tiger Woods. And it was just, I mean, I can't help it. I find the guy mesmerizing. And his body language, you get so excited when he...
Vintage Tiger.
It was great. It was from 2008 when he was in the process.
In the prime of his career.
Oh, they showed him sinking another putt, and you just think, oh my God.
But like Scottie Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, I mean, some of the biggest names in golf, I mean, really struggled at Oakmont this year. But JJ Spawn came out of nowhere. I was kind of rooting, though, for Adam Scott. I always like when
I don't know who he is.
So Adam Scott's an Australian golfer. He's won majors before. He's like a 40. I like people who are in their 40s and still can like accomplish things because it makes me like feel better about my future.
So you know what's great? If they're playing at Pebble Beach in California.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And there's the fairway and there's the ocean. I mean, it's just pretty.
Do you know what one you guys might like? And I've been dying to go to this tournament. I have to find a way to go. The Waste Management Open. It's always around. It's called the Waste Management Open.
Where is
it's in Scottsdale, Arizona. And the 17th green is like a frat party. It's like got keg stands, and it's like the opposite of what you think of golf, which is like very well coiffed individuals walking around. I mean, it is just like a college. It's like a college party, and I'm dying to go.
But by the way, a moment of seriousness about this: the Live Tour, which is the one sponsored by the murderous Saudis, is they can cheer and they
can participate in
fans cheer, and it's not the hush hush kind of.
No, it's not. It's sort of also like, and I don't really watch a lot of live golf because honestly I don't even know where to find it. I don't know where you can watch it. But I did watch the indoor golf that happened this year. It's the like Fenway Sports Group. That's where they're investing their money. That's where they have a team in it. So it's an indoor, part of it's simulator, part of it is like on an indoor like chipping and putting green. But there are like timers and lights and cheering, and it's a totally different atmosphere than regular golf.
This story I loved in the New York Times,
Me
written by a
too.
person, June Lee, who's a local, right?
He is a local kid.
You know him?
I know him well. He's on my show. In fact, he's going to be on my show tonight.
Wonderful.
The title of this brilliant piece, the two food guys, the farmers, a few minutes ago, were talking about how unifying in a polarized society farming is. That's one of his central points in something called How the NBA and MLB, Major League Baseball, Shattered America's Sports Culture. Share his thesis.
So June is extraordinarily smart. He's a really talented writer. He actually wrote a really great piece about not investigative, but well-sourced piece on how things fell apart with Rafael Devers.
Oh, he did.
And he also wrote this column for the New York Times. So basically, the column for the New York Times starts with him being at a game during 2013 with his father and seeing David Ortiz hit this massive home run en route to the Red Sox winning the 2013 World Series, coming off the tragic marathon bombing. And he talks about how accessible sports used to be, that you could, flip on your TV, watch whatever you want. You could go to a game. You could get into Fenway Park, on discounted tickets, and you go and get 4 hot dogs. It was like an affordable thing to do with your family. And now he puts in this article that he subscribes, because he's a sports journalist, he subscribes to every streaming service. I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was upwards of $2,700 a year he spends on various streaming services in order to access all of the sports. And he talks about how sports used to be this communal thing that brought everybody together, but now, much like the rest of the world, we are pricing people out. So if you want to get close to the athletes and you want to sit courtside or you want to sit close to the action, I mean, you're talking about upwards of hundreds, sometimes thousands, definitely if you want to sit courtside, tens of thousands of dollars to have those premium seats. So say you want to go sit up in the nosebleeds. He cites somebody in this, actually I was reading the comments. I saw someone in the comments say that they wanted to take their kids for Father's Day to Chavez Ravine, which is where the Dodgers play. Upper deck, second row from the top, 4 tickets, $800.
Oh my God.
4 tickets, $800. He said by the time he left, he had spent over $1,000 taking his family to the baseball game.
And the critical line, let me just read what I was suggesting. In the middle of June Lee's piece, he writes, "What she's mourning," and he's talking about a woman who, as the general manager of Rookies Sports Bar and Grill in Clive, Iowa, what she's mourning isn't just the game or the lost business. It's the feeling that games brought people together, that even in a fractured country, sports gave her bar a pulse.
Well, and now because you have to pay, if you're a bar, you have to buy a special package, so you have to pay more. Like my in-laws used to watch my show every single night. Like if I was sick, my husband Sean would like get a text like from his mom, like, "Is Trenni okay? What's going on?" And he's like, "She's at a board meeting. It's fine." But we charge everybody more now. We're $20 extra. We're on a different tier. But part of that is because everybody has cut the cord. And so we have to make up prices somewhere. But to June's point in this article, now it's become where everybody's just these leagues are trying to squeeze the most money out of everyone. And it's hurting smaller teams and helping larger teams.
Didn't there used to be something called a salary cap?
Well,
way back when?
There are kind of, like there's a salary cap in football. NFL is still and this is partially why it's probably the most popular sport in the country. It is still the most accessible. Like if you want to watch the Patriots play, you can reliably watch them almost every Sunday or Thursday, or at least on Sundays. At Sunday games and Monday games, you can pretty reliably watch them either on an over-the-air station or on ESPN. But if you want to watch them on Thursday, you have to have an Amazon Prime. If you want to watch them on a special occasion, you have to have a Peacock account. There's also like the Yankees Red Sox games. One of the games over the weekend was on some like random streaming service or 2 weekends ago that I had never even heard of. Like I'm not going to subscribe to that. Like so, it's just they are just taking money every single place they can, and so it's getting harder and harder for people to watch sports.
What time's he on with you tonight?
June's going to be on with me he's going to be on for our whole show, so from 6 to 7 p.m.
Great.
And right after that, you can watch Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever take on the Connecticut Sun right on NBC Sports Boston.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Look at one of our texters said, it's free, Jim and Marjorie at BPL and 89.7 at GBH and at YouTube. So that's a very good point. Trenni, thank you very much.
Great to see you, Trenni.
Thanks, guys.
We've been speaking with Trenni Casey, anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston and BPR contributor. After a quick break, you know by now that critical funding for public media is under threat of being clawed back by the federal government. We'll talk with our own boss, President and CEO Susan Goldberg, about the future of public media, the very precarious future. You're listening to BPR 89.7 GBH live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Support for our programs comes from you.
And Beacon Circle patrons Karen and Joel Sirkin. Proud to support GBH 89.7 and the commitment to local, national, and global journalism that inspires, engages, and supports diversity in the community. And Mass General Brigham. Their leading heart and vascular specialists are committed to providing breakthrough care to patients with cutting-edge research and innovative treatments. Learn more at massgeneralbrigham.org/heart. And the Museum of Science, presenting the new exhibit, Perception Playground, which explores how your brain shapes your understanding of reality. Tickets at MOS.org. And Compass on the Bay, an assisted living community in South Boston dedicated to those with Alzheimer's and related dementias, featuring research-based therapeutic programming. More at compassonthebay.com.
Welcome back to BPR. Marjorie Egan, Jim Browdy. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Coming up at 1 o'clock, it's Mayor Wu will join us for an hour of Ask the Mayor. You can start lining up whenever you want with calls or texts at 877-301-8970. But first, we're joined at the library desk by our boss, Susan Goldberg, President and CEO of GBH. Susan, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for coming in, Susan.
Thanks, Marjorie. Thanks, Jim.
So people may know that some members of the GOP have been gunning for PBS and NPR for a long time. The House just passed a bill that would cut off funding. I think it was 214 to 212, and now the bill is in the Senate. So what's going on in the Senate, and are our prospects any better there?
Well, I think they are a little bit better there. So this was last week, and the House did pass by that very slim margin this rescission package put forward by the president, by President Trump's administration, and it would claw back $1.1 billion worth of funding that was already allocated for Congress to fund public media in fiscal years 26 and 27. Fiscal year 26 begins in October, so it's not a long time from now. So it did pass by that narrow margin. I thought for a minute there that it was going to go down, but it passed. So now it goes to the Senate, and because this is on a time clock of just 45 days, so they've got until, I believe it is July 18th, where they have to either pass this through or the money, or it loses and we stay. I do think we have a better chance in the Senate. And the real conversation is, what gets hurt by the loss of public media, right? What stations all over the country in news deserts will absolutely disappear? What emergency services disappear? What content, especially for kids, and we make a bunch of it, will completely disappear? So that's going to be the conversation you're going to be hearing between now and at latest July 18th.
Can we bifurcate that? We had Ken Burns on at 11:30 to celebrate Bunker Hill Day, and after he said, "You'll love this," he said he almost stuttered when he said, "Frontline is the greatest program ever," is what he said. But he went on to say he wasn't saying that the elimination of funding would not be horrible for us. You'll tell us in a minute. But particularly where you seem to be going, a lot of the smaller stations, many of which are in red states, which are 100% reliant on their local PBS or NPR station, they disappear if this money disappears, correct?
Some of them would disappear. For example, I was just reading this morning that the station in Erie, Pennsylvania gets 50% of all of its budget from the federal government. Now, that's a very different situation from what we have at GBH, where that number is 8%.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a little bit of a complicated situation because we get money from PBS to make all of these programs, but if you're a station and you're getting half of your money from the federal government, and it is a lot of these small stations in news deserts, many of them in red states, this is an existential crisis.
So what does it mean? I obviously don't want to suggest, nor do you, that it doesn't have meaning for us. As I'm sure people who listen to the show or consume the media know, there was a roughly 4% cut in staff a year ago because of budgetary concerns here, another 6 several weeks ago. This is obviously pre any kind of rescission of federal funding. What would this mean for us should Congress do the Senate do the wrong thing?
Well, if the Senate does pass this package, I think that we're going to have to look at our programming just across everything that we do. It's our national programs definitely could be affected, and it's everything from American Experience and Frontline, Nova, Masterpiece, Antiques Roadshow. All of those shows could be affected in one way or another. I'm not saying we're going to not make them, but we might have to make some fewer of them, for example. But already our money for kids programming has been affected when he canceled the grants that we got from the Department of Education to create children's television. This is educational children's television. So much money is spent on the research. How do you teach kids to read in a way that's fun? How do you teach them to do math? That money's already gone, and some of our unfortunate layoffs were due to the elimination of that money.
And we should make clear, as you did in passing a minute ago, is not only are those shows of huge value to this community, GBH is responsible for what? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 40%? What's the number of television that's put on the air at PBS stations around the country.
We're the largest producer of content
in the country
for PBS. So we are proudly local. We are proudly Boston and proudly actually all across the Commonwealth in our reach. But we are all over the country, and in fact, with some shows like Frontline, those air globally as well.
We're talking to Susan Goldberg, President and CEO of GBH.
You know, I think one of the Republican senators that may help is Lisa Murkowski. And I heard legislators talking over the weekend up in Alaska about the fact that there are very far-flung areas of Alaska that their NPR station is it.
She has talked a lot about that, and I don't know if you remember the hearing in front of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Doge hearing. Well, the president of the local PBS station in Alaska was on there talking about the significant impact in a lot of those far-flung and remote communities that just will not have access to news, to emergency services, to really programming of any kind.
Here's a note you'd find interesting. Jamie leads our show. My son, 5 years old, was watching PBS Kids programming over the weekend, and he started crying, worried he'd lose wild krats and wombats. I promised him I'd do what I can to keep his favorite shows on. I bet you there are a lot of little kids whose parents are talking about this who are going through what Jamie's kid is doing.
You know, thank you for that. And as you know, we make Work It Out Wombats. This is a show that teaches kids. It teaches kids about computational thinking, breaking down problems, solving things one step at a time. I mean, I wish every adult would watch Work It Out Wombats. We'd probably live in a saner community. But you've got to think, how are we going to be able to create those shows when all of the money that does the research to help us create those shows has just gone away?
So Jill Abramson used to have a pretty big job. She used to run the New York Times as the lead editor. You know her. I do. You've known her for a long time. She writes a piece in the Globe the other day, and I'll summarize it, and you'll tell me if you think it's unfair. She said, in normal times, one can make an argument for the fact that even though we're one of 4 cities in the country that has 2 NPR stations, maybe they should merge. But the argument is even stronger, she would advance, when funding for both BUR and both GBH are at risk. For those who don't know, you have a long relationship with Margaret Lowe, who runs BUR. What's your reaction to what Jill had to say? And 2, have there ever been conversations between BUR and us about some sort of merger?
Well, I will tell you that from the moment I got to Boston 2.5 years ago, what I have heard most consistently, other than comments about our programming, is, why don't you merge with BUR, right? It is a real refrain. And, you know, I think that, I wish Jill would have called me for that story, because as you say, Jim, I have known her for, I don't know, probably about 25 years. And what I would have told her is that I think that we are living in such a disruptive time that we need to talk about all different kinds of ways to move forward. Look, Margaret and I talk all the time. I have great admiration for a lot of the
Margaret
work.
Lowe, BUR.
Margaret, the head of BUR. You know, I have a lot of admiration for the work that they do. But I don't think people also realize how different we are from BUR. You know, we are both NPR stations, but we are also, as we just talked about, PBS. We've got a whole children's arm. We've got a whole education arm. We do all of this stuff all over the country. We own 2 other radio stations, WCAI at the Cape, NEPM in Western Massachusetts. We have a classical station as well. So we're about 4 times larger than they are, and we do a lot of different things. So in many ways we're complementary, but in many ways we just do different
But you're not saying, I mean, I listened carefully, you're not saying no. You're saying everything's on the table. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's fair to say that at a time when there is a real threat to federal funding for public media, you should be open-minded about how you operate.
Okay, so you say the most common question you get is that. The most common question we get from people in Massachusetts, we have tons of listeners, you know, beyond our borders, but from people in Massachusetts, all of the members of the delegation are for us. We mentioned you, we were speaking to Senator Markey the other night, Marjorie and I. He couldn't be working harder to try to keep this thing alive. I know you're dealing with him too. What do you say to somebody who's in a pro-CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting state? What do they do? How do they help keep this whole program alive?
Well, I think what's really important is people should go to Protect My Public Media, which is a website. Literally millions of people have gone to Protect My Public Media.
What?
And what?
What? We'll check it out.
I think if you just type
it in. Okay, fine.
protect my public media, you'll get to the right place. But millions of people have reached out to Congress to express their thoughts, and I think that really does make a huge difference because it really matters to a lot of people, and it costs Americans all of $1.60 a year.
So you're never nervous publicly, which is our interaction with you. Are you nervous inside about this?
I'm not happy about this.
Okay.
I mean, this I do think it is the in 50 years of threats in Republican administrations to funding for public media, this is by far the most serious. And the Senate might not be the end of it. Say we're able to beat that package back in the Senate. You know, I have heard the administration's budget director on CNN and in other fora, and there's a story in the New York Times today talking about just impounding the money. And would they just impound the money, which would end up in court, I'm sure, like so many things have, but that could all take a while to work out.
So we have to be vigilant for 3.5 years is the bottom line.
Yeah.
At least.
Susan Goldberg, keep doing it, and thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very
both.
much
Thanks
for coming
so much.
in. Susan Goldberg is president and CEO of GBH, and we thank her very, very much for taking time to come in and talk about this. Coming up after the 1 o'clock news, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu is here for Ask the Mayor. She'll take our questions and yours. Until the end of the show, you're listening to BPR on 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
One individual can make a difference. A group of individuals can make a big difference. GBH is founded on listener support, and it's not about how much you give. It's about how many people get involved. Be the next to make a difference at gbhnews.org.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Jim Browdy, head on Hour 3 of BPR, live from the Boston Public Library. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu joins us for the June edition of Ask the Mayor. We talk about what the city can do to combat the sky-high cost of housing and opponents' criticism of her for the cost of White Stadium and the arrival of late-night food trucks.
I'm Marjorie Egan. We'll also get a response to Todd Lyons, acting director for ICE, accusing her and Governor Healy of, quote, touting lawlessness. Have a question that you'd like to put in front of the mayor? Call or text us at 877-301-8970. Or if you're in the Copley Square area, come on down to the library and ask her in person. Ask the Mayor is next on the third hour of BPR 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump is calling for Iran's, quote, unconditional surrender on social media. The U.S. leader also issued a threat to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He said the Ayatollah's location is known and is an easy target, but Trump goes on to say, quote, we are not going to take him out, at least for now, end quote. Trump saying he doesn't want missiles hitting civilians or American soldiers as Iran and Israel continue airstrikes on each other. Trump's tone appearing to have changed since yesterday when he suggested a nuclear deal with Iran was, quote, achievable. The Department of Homeland Security is doubling down on its efforts to crack down on industries where there are large estimates of workers without legal status. The New York Times reported last week Immigration and Customs Enforcement sent guidance asking officers to largely pause raids and arrests in the agriculture industry, hotels, and restaurants. But today, DHS said there has been no change in policy. NPR's Jimena Bustillo has more.
DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin told NPR that, quote, there will be no safe spaces for industries who harbor violent criminals or purposely try to undermine ICE's efforts. The comments come after immigration officers conducted several arrests at farms in California and at a meatpacking plant in Nebraska. The arrest signaled the agriculture industry could soon be a target for the Trump administration's efforts to find, arrest, and deport people without legal status. The agriculture industry is among those that employ large numbers of workers without work authorization. And in recent months, thousands of people have lost their ability to work legally after the administration revoked certain protections and parole. Jimena Bustillo, NPR News, Washington.
The latest Russian missile and drone attacks in Ukraine have left at least 15 people dead. Dozens more were injured. More from NPR's Joanna Kakissis in Kyiv.
Ukrainian air defense units spent hours trying to shoot down drones and missiles. By sunrise, the air smelled burnt as thick plumes of smoke rose from parts of the city. At least a dozen sites were hit, many of them residential buildings. Videos posted by Ukrainian authorities showed the collapse of part of an apartment complex. The strikes come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is at the G7 summit in Canada, pushing for stronger sanctions on Russia. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News, Kyiv.
The only commercial robotaxi operating in the U.S. so far says it's expanding across the San Francisco Bay Area. Alphabet, the parent company of the self-driving ride-hailing service Waymo, says it also plans to reach paying customers in more parts of Los Angeles starting tomorrow. Tesla, meanwhile, is also preparing to launch paid robotaxi service in Austin, Texas. You're listening to NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. A new report from Mass General Brigham and the Greater Boston Food Bank shows that hunger in Massachusetts remains a pressing problem. The 5th annual Food Access Study found that 1 in 3 families in the state cannot count on their next meal. The report was unveiled today at the MGH Revere Food Pantry with community leaders and members of the state's congressional delegation in attendance. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley says the federal spending bill that's pending on Capitol Hill right now would make food insecurity even worse.
If passed, Massachusetts would lose hundreds of millions of dollars worth of SNAP benefits. This is an existential threat to the more than 187,000 people in my district who receive food stamps. And that is why my colleagues and I are fighting like hell.
According to the study, 37% of Massachusetts households faced food insecurity this year. That's nearly double the figure from 2019. Federal judge appointed by the late President Ronald Reagan has accused the Trump administration of appalling and obviously clear discrimination against racial minorities and LGBTQ+ Americans. Yesterday, U.S. District Judge William Young's accusations came during a court hearing and was a reference to 2 executive orders signed by Trump that led to the National Institutes of Health to rescind funding for research related to minorities and LGBTQ+ people. Red Sox try to make it 7 wins in a row tonight when they play Game 2 of their series with the Mariners in Seattle. Florida Panthers could win the Stanley Cup with a win over the Oilers tonight. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. This is NPR.
Welcome to hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're not going to be here tomorrow. We have our annual staff retreat, but we'll be back live on Thursday in Brighton and back here at the library on Friday. The mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, is going to be with us in just a couple of minutes. Hello again, Jim.
Hey, and she's right over there. She's
right over there.
Looking at her phone, she's probably reading about Marjorie's candidacy for virtually any office.
I think I'm making her nervous,
and probably,
Jim.
I would say she's probably terrorized over there at the wherever. She is walking in our direction. She'll be here in a second. And if you have questions, you can, as I assume you know by now, 3 options. You can text us. You can call us, meaning her, at 877-301-8970. Or you can go see our 2 colleagues, Nia and Hannah, both of whom are sitting at that little table thing there. And if you have a question that is not out of bounds, there's a fairly good chance you'll get to ask it of the mayor face-to-face. And speaking of that very same mayor, we're now joined at the library desk from now until the end of the show by Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. She's here to take our questions and yours for the June edition of Ask the Mayor. I told you about the number and all that sort of things. So earlier today, Mayor, we were talking to Ken Burns, giving us a little history on the Battle of Bunker Hill. So I wanted to, wish you Happy Bunker Hill Day and ask you if you're the only city employee who's working today. Is that are you?
Well, same to you. Happy Bunker Hill Day
Thank
to
you.
all.
Yeah.
250 years
That's right.
of Boston standing up for what we believe in and our community here. So it was, I don't remember when, I mean, at least probably almost a decade ago that Bunker Hill Day was removed as an official city
isn't?
holiday.
I didn't know
Oh, my
that.
goodness.
How
The kids are in school right now.
Oh.
Everybody's working. So.
Horrible.
Jim,
One of the great moments.
how did we miss that?
When there was an attempt to get rid of Bunker Hill Day and one of those other things, I can't remember what it was, Jack Hart, who was a state senator, who you may recall, is from Boston, said, what are they going to come for next? Thanksgiving? Christmas? In any case, Mayor Wu, it's really good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you.
So, Mayor, you have been, I would say, in the crosshairs of some people in the ICE administration, the ICE immigration people for quite some time. I'm going to play a clip from the U.S. Attorney from Massachusetts, Leah Foley, who called you out for your statements about ICE actions. Here it is.
Boston's Mayor Michelle Wu made reckless and inflammatory statements regarding enforcement efforts made by federal immigration authorities across the Commonwealth. Referring to federal agents as, quote, secret police is offensive. There are no secret police.
So you responded to her criticisms. What'd you say?
Look, I stand by my statements because I was just saying what Bostonians are seeing with their own eyes. We've seen the video. Too many communities have seen it happen right in their own neighborhoods where masked individuals who are not wearing badges openly or identification are coming in unmarked vehicles, jumping out, snatching people off the streets, and then not telling their loved ones who are standing there asking why they're taking them, where they're taking them, how to contact anyone afterwards. I mean, this is it's not a question of facts. This is what is documented to be happening all across the country at this point, including property damage, smashing car windows to drag people out without telling them why if they have a warrant and often don't have a warrant and why they are taking them. So, I'm just stating that these tactics are the opposite of what makes communities safer. And no one's buying that line that we're just here to help make everyone safer. We know what safety looks like in the city of Boston. We are the safest major city in the country. And that's because our officers and our community members have strong relationships and collaboration. Our officers are in very difficult situations every day too. I speak with their families and they worry as well about the safety of their loved ones as they're called 24 hours a day into very tough situations, and they don't routinely wear masks. They wear body cameras that document everything that's happening. They are identified. They are sharing afterwards who was arrested and why. So we've been asking the same of ICE and have submitted our Freedom of Information Act requests last Friday in order to get that information. And they have now since said that they intend to comply. So I hope to see that actually happen in action and not just words as well, because how can it be in a country of laws and in a democracy, how can it be up for discussion whether we should have information on who has been arrested, for what reason, and where they're being held?
Do you feel powerless in some way? We had the Attorney General here, 3-4 weeks ago, talking about how I'm putting out a kit, which she did subsequently put out, what your rights are, what are the rights if you're an observer of ICE snatching somebody. But she basically said, I'm putting words in her mouth, but I think it's fair. There's only so much one can do about the feds doing what they do. Do you feel powerless except for your bully pulpit in this situation, Mayor?
So there's a lot of what's happening is outside of anyone else's control except for the federal government and the administration. And this is why elections have consequences, and we're seeing those consequences right now. However, even the federal government is bound by our laws. And the problem here is not that cities disagree politically with a person who was elected and therefore we want to override what they're doing and obstruct them or prevent them from doing what is within their jurisdiction to do. It's actually that we're not sure if they're even following the Constitution, civil rights, human rights, basic laws, and they're not doing anything to try to prove that they are. And so we do need to call out what is happening when there are what seem like clear violations of all of the things that I just mentioned, and to use the powers that we do have, right? The Freedom of Information Act applies to everyone in government, that there are clear standards for what we have to be transparent about. So we have moved forward with what we can do within our jurisdiction, and we're doing everything that we can to protect Boston and to continue to stand strong.
Before we get to the calls, 877-301-8970 and text. Your primary challenger yesterday, Josh Kraft, had a press conference in which he talked about White Stadium and its cost, and he said I'm paraphrasing, the recent figures that the city is putting out roughly in the $100 million range, the city's share, that he had spoken to sources within City Hall, which he would not identify, that suggested the city's share could go as high as at least $170 million. Again, he wouldn't say what the source was, except inside your administration. And the Globe wrote last night, the Wu campaign did not refute the $170 million figure to the Globe. Do you refute the $170 million figure?
Yes, I do. And just to be clear, and we tried to explain this to them afterwards too, and it didn't go well. But I had said, we don't know where these numbers are coming from. They're not the numbers and it's not the process. So let me just sort of give a quick overview of the process and then how I feel about this particular situation in terms of pulling something out and then claiming that it is reality and sort of fear-mongering with it. The city does lots of projects all over the place, and it's part of delivering services to our residents that we are redeveloping libraries and fixing a fire station, for example, recently in Dorchester, by building a new one when the old one was not fit for our firefighters to be using on a daily basis, community centers, schools. So there's a professionalized operation of how these projects happen. And there's a set flow of how you come up with the thing that needs to be built or renovated. You have a very, very early initial look at what the capital budget might need to include, at least for the design of it. And then there's a design process that gets community feedback on what community members actually want to see, that then results in a more detailed design where you can get an actual cost estimate based on the square footage and the shapes of the buildings that are needed. And then, so all of that is part of schematic design. And then there's design development, which takes that set concept and really breaks it down into, okay, well, what would this mean for the wiring and what needs to, the cross sections of all the different areas to get it so that we could then move into construction plans, construction documents, which then get bid out for the contractors to actually do the work. So the budget as it stands goes through those early estimates, which there was about $50 million just reserved when it was, okay, if we want to build a strength and conditioning space and have the track and the field and this and that redone, $50 million would be a very big boxy building there. Went out to the community, people said, this is a historic park. You can't have a big boxy structure there. It should be in line with the views that Olmsted intended, and so then it got broken down into multiple slimmer, smaller buildings to accommodate all that space, and that's where the $91 million construction estimate was. And then in the process now of design development, really going back through value engineering and trying to get to the point where construction documents will be bid out, that will be the next point where the budget is finalized based on what the market actually is, what the costs are, right? The price of steel has gone up significantly since we started this process because of tariffs. Other construction costs have escalated with the uncertainty in the economy. And so we will have that as the documents get bid out. That should start later this summer. But I wanted to be sure where this was coming from, this idea that there's a secret number that everyone's been hiding. And so we actually did dig through, just because there was this assertion that it was coming from within City Hall, and actually one of the journalists shared the secret document. It was like a screenshot, a picture of someone's computer that had been sent around as this is the actual real budget. We tracked that down, and it turns out that is a document that was in someone's files about White Stadium, but that we go through all sorts of disaster planning and scenario planning. The budget team, especially within the Public Facilities Department, will do a version that's contingency on contingency on contingency. So that particular document that it seems was accessed by someone who was not on the project and probably shouldn't have been looking at it, and then somehow got to a campaign, has never been used as the real basis for conversations or costs. And so that is not a real number, that is not the real cost, and it's concerning in an environment where we do see so much, especially in the federal government, people saying, don't believe your eyes, ICE is actually making you safer, this or that, DOGE is making government more effective and more efficient, to say, don't believe anything that you hear or see from the official city channels. It's actually this secret thing that's happening without context, without knowledge of what that actually is. It's harmful, it's disrespectful, it's offensive to the hardworking professional teams who do this in the city, many of whom have been building buildings for the public far before my administration started, who know what they're doing, have their processes. And so I would just say the residents of Boston deserve better in terms of real facts, real information, and being able to have that context.
So just to be clear, one last thing, and then we will get to the calls. You're saying you refute the notion that this is some hidden document that reflects the real cost. You're nodding in agreement.
Yeah, there are about 8 different versions of all sorts of...
You're not saying, based upon these additional factors that you were just describing, that the price will not go above the figure that is the most recent public figure. In all likelihood, it will go up. But you're not saying that?
Yes, that between...
To what? Could you guarantee to the people of the city that it won't go above any particular number, or you can't do that right now?
It is highly, highly unlikely that it will hit this sort of 172 number that's been floated out there, because that was an absolute worst case scenario, every layer contingency, and it does not reflect anything that's grounded in reality, does not come from any conversations.
Do you have a number that you think is likely?
We are moving through design development right now, and that, again, next step would be construction documents. There's a lot of different line items in there, every little thing, the cost of steel, the foundation. So far, a little over $5 million has been spent on demolition to date, and we expect that the foundation would be somewhere in the sort of low double digits of cost to pour and lay the foundation, which will be the first set of construction documents that go out for bid, and then we'll know the costs from there.
Mary Ann in Cambridge, you're first with the mayor of the city of Boston, Michelle Wu. Hi.
Oh, hi. Yeah, this is Mary Ann. I'm calling because I'm concerned that the city is spending so much money on a vanity project when Boston public school students are in need of better teachers, better school facilities, and in need of a public sports facility.
Which vanity project are you referring to?
White Stadium.
Oh, okay. Well, in fact, I'm very glad you called then with that concern, because if those were the facts as you are stating them, I would agree with you. But in fact, we worked really hard to make sure that we would do this project right. White Stadium is, in fact, the public schools sports facility. It has been for 70 years. It has not been fixed up or renovated during that time, and it has been decrepit and getting worse for many decades at this point. I have met people of every age who have memories of running a track meet there or coming for a practice, and they tell me even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, White Stadium needed fixes. And so we, in fact, are moving forward to deliver the type of renovation that is needed. It will remain owned by the Boston Public Schools and for Boston Public School student athletes and for the park community. So just a quick rundown of what the lease detail includes that's bound by legal contracts. The professional soccer team would rent the ability to have their games there for up to 20 games a year, if they make the playoffs, for example, and one practice on the field for each week before the game. So less than 10% of the time of the field use would be for that. Even on the days where they are playing a game, they cannot start the game before 5 p.m. so that we can have a full track meet or events there in the morning. They can't end the game past, I think it's 11 p.m. so to make sure that the neighbors have, quality of life is preserved. They can't have more than 2 weekend games per 4-week period so that it's not taking up every weekend. Every little detail's laid out. They pay $400,000 a year in rent, going up with inflation. They pay $500,000 a year to Franklin Park, for park improvements going up with inflation. $1 per ticket goes to the tree fund so that there will be even more trees. And finally, the investments in the park. They will also maintain and are legally bound to keep the facility open 16 hours a day. Currently, it's open from 8 to 4 during the week, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. They will also pay for all of, not just more than half the construction costs, but the full maintenance and operations costs will be borne by the team throughout the course of that lease. And it will be for Boston Public School students and who have scheduling priority in that. So we're doing exactly what you say.
Marianne, thank you for the call. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
Let us go to Dean in Hyde Park. Thank you for calling, Dean.
Hello, Dean.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Mayor Wu, you campaigned on a platform of climate resiliency and climate justice, so I'm hoping that you can explain to me, the rest of your constituents, how paying $19 million to repave Copley Square does more to protect the climate than preserving Crane Ledge Woods, which is a 24-acre forest in Hyde Park, a predominantly working-class neighborhood with a high percentage of people of color. It is the largest remaining unprotected urban wild in the city of Boston, and it's currently slated for residential development, market rate with little affordability built in. And preserving it as a forest would go a long way toward mitigating the impact of climate change, given what we all know about the importance of keeping the tree canopy intact. My understanding is that the city has not made a serious offer to Jubilee Christian Church, the current owners, to acquire the parcel and preserve it as an urban wild. And I totally get that Copley Square is more visible and it's far sexier, but I'm struggling to see how repaving Copley Square does more to advance climate resiliency than preserving 24 acres of forest.
We got it. Dean, thank you very much for your question. Mayor Wu?
Thank you. Thank you for raising it and for following so closely. So there's really two issues here, and I want to be clear about the relationship between them or really the lack thereof here. We have, as I mentioned, a capital budget every year that goes through, so just as I mentioned, all the libraries, community centers, fire stations, parks are another category or another line within that category. And there's a regular rotation of when different parks have to come up for renovations. Copley Square had been in the plans for many, many years and had been slated for some major investments for the first time in decades. We had heard that the grass part was constantly muddy, that there was different needs with the farmers market and other events. We had feedback from the church, from neighbors, from everyone. There was a 2-year process to talk about it. And in fact, the sort of frenzy around the fact that all the green was paved over and is no longer gone, it's quite premature. The city worked really hard to open part of the project early. The project won't be done until later this calendar year, but the team worked really hard so that the paved part would be open in time for the marathon, so that with all the crowds here, there would be extra overflow space, and that was where the medical tent was located, so it could help with the marathon. But in fact, there will be almost 50% more trees in the final Copley Square plan than there had been before. The green space is getting relocated, again, with the feedback of the church and other stakeholders, that it needs to be in a different location and be taken care of better so that it can actually be used. And the trees are all being preserved that are there now, but the number one cause of tree mortality in cities is their roots getting trampled and the soil getting compacted around their roots. So the trees are being preserved there's a little sort of raised platform above them, so that will keep them healthy. So there will be a grove there that's protected at the root area. The plantings can't go in until the weather's the right temperature, so that's why it couldn't be done in time for March anyway, but you'll see the full Copley Plaza by the end of this calendar year. On Crane Ledge Woods, again, it's not an either or. The city does have an open space acquisition fund. There's something like $5 million in it for the next 3 years, and we made as much of an offer as was feasible for the city at the moment. We also had worked to provide and even redraw designs that would be able to do both, have housing there, have the density, have the wealth building for the property owners there in the church, an incredible staple of the community, and also preserve the key parts of the urban wilds there. The church had said they weren't interested, and they were locked into a contract where they have to move forward with what they have. We had a recent meeting that the city and the church and everyone were part of, and it was asked again for the church, will you sell the property to the city? And they said no, they were not interested. And people pressed, the community members pressed, we'll just throw out a figure, put out a number that you would be willing to sell for. And they said, $100 million, right? So that's just not within the scope of the city's budget, but really it reflects that they have stated repeatedly that they are not interested in selling their private property at this point. So we'll continue to try to engage on how to protect the key parts of the urban wilds there. But this is a private property owner who has the right to do what they're doing, and we're here at the city to try to assist however we can.
Dean, thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
You know, there's been a lot of talk. The Trump administration, is correct, does not want foreign students, to make it very difficult for foreign students to come to schools in the United States. And we have BU, BC, Northeastern, Harvard over in Cambridge, all these schools in Boston. What could this mean to? How much could this hurt Boston's economy if these students aren't here anymore?
I mean, this is huge. You can ask any restaurant or small business kind of in certain neighborhoods of the city what it means come June when the students all go home, and they feel it, right? I was just at a restaurant over the weekend and asking how things were going, and she said, well, it's, we're in that time of the year where we really rely on locals to step up because the foot traffic is less because the students aren't here in its high numbers. And so to have students permanently removed or barred or even frankly just intimidated from being in Boston, that has a huge impact. It's our economy, it's the incredible contributions that these students are making to research, to being involved in volunteering and being active members of our community while we're here. But I think even deeper than that, because I saw there was something in the Globe about, this is an economic issue, and it is, but it's also just our fundamental morality and humanity that we had a student in Massachusetts, right, in Somerville, a tough student, snatched off the street, who was here legally, who had legal status to be here, where, quote unquote, it was revoked immediately before the interaction happened, supposedly. And thank goodness Rumesa is back here and back home after much advocacy and enduring some horrific conditions that no one should have to in that situation. But this is a statement about who we are as a city. And again, we're celebrating 250 years since Boston helped kick off the birth of this nation and our democracy. And it's because the city has always stood for Boston being a home to the people who live here rather than taking the guidance or instructions from those at other levels who are trying to tell us how to take care of our own.
So, Mayor Wu, before we take a break, let's do a little bit of good news. Late night food trucks. I like late, I like night, and I like food trucks. So it's like a perfect combo. What's going on?
Okay, I want to make sure to get the locations accurately as well. But this is a really exciting one for me because my very first project working for Mayor Menino 15 years ago was to help rewrite the laws in Boston so that we could actually have food trucks in the city. At that time, there were very archaic hawkers and peddlers licenses that meant that you could not have anything resembling a food truck. And so we had launched the Food Truck Challenge back in the day, and in the years since then, this has really become, in some ways, a standalone industry with great jobs, but also one very connected to the brick and mortar restaurant industry. Multiple brick and mortar restaurants now have come out of concepts that started in a food truck. You can do it more affordably. And then you can also get options, fresh, healthy options out to different neighborhoods very quickly as well, as we're adding more liquor licenses and working on more restaurants too. So there are 7 sites that will have late night food trucks, and this is part of the nightlife office's work. They're located near hospitals, universities, music venues, places where people are likely to be anyway. And so the sites are Stewart Street near the Theater District, Ipswich Street in Fenway, Life Street near the Roadrunner, Harrison Ave near Boston Medical Center, Faneuil Hall, Boylston and Clarendon, and Opera Place at Northeastern. So there was a lottery that any food truck operator who was interested could lottery to get a spot, and we will be announcing who was selected in that lottery in the coming weeks.
What does late mean?
I think it is until 2 a.m.
Oh, really?
Maybe my team can...
We're checking.
Varies, but Oh, varies by location. Okay, I'm sure it's all up on the website.
Okay,
so
and
people can check
how
it
do
out.
people find these locations, and how will they identify what trucks are where once they're chosen? Where do they go?
You go to the City of Boston website, all of that will be posted, but we'll do a big announcement once the lottery winners are chosen with all the information.
Great.
We're talking with Mayor Wu. She's going to be with us till the top of the hour. You can reach her by phone or by text. The number is 877-301-8970, or you can come down here to the Boston Public Library and ask her a question yourself. You are listening to Boston Public Radio and 89.7 GBH, and we are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Colonel Bree Fram was developing advanced technology for the Space Force when President Trump's transgender ban forced her out.
That's what really has me worried about where we find ourselves today, that we are turning away people who may have the brain power that will revolutionize the way we fight in cyberspace, in space, or on any other battlefield.
Our conversation and the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And the Office of the Massachusetts State Treasurer, the Unclaimed Property Division, is holding unclaimed funds from utility bills, uncashed paychecks, savings accounts, and more. To see if you have unclaimed money, you can visit findmassmoney.gov. And MIT Federal Credit Union, helping members achieve their financial goals with savings account options, including high-yield money market accounts. Membership info and more at mitfcu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan, Jim Browdy, live from the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're continuing our discussion until the end of the show with Mayor Wu, kind enough to join us for June's Ask the Mayor. Again, you all know this. You contact her by text or phone at 877-301-8970, or you go to Nia or Hannah and you ask, tell them what you want to ask, and there's a good chance you'll get to that microphone there, I think.
Okay. What are our presents today, Mayor Wu? You always come bearing gifts very nicely.
So these are swag from Pride over the weekend.
Excellent.
Thank you.
From our, so water bottles and, again, I said one of these is broken, which we're going to bring a new one. So you'll have to rock, paper, scissors for this one. Jim has said that you can have this, Marjorie.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We had a great day. It was the combination of the No Kings demonstration as well as Pride, Bunker Hill the day after. So many people came out even in the rain, and it was peaceful, joyful, and only how Boston can do it, with all the right signs and a lot of energy to say we are who we are, and we're proud of that.
You know, before we get back to the calls, the dark side of this weekend was what happened, one of the many things, what happened in Minnesota, obviously, with the execution of this legislator and her husband, the shooting of another legislator and her husband, and all the stories surrounding it. I'm sure you didn't need to read the stories, say the political violence is on the increase. Josh Shapiro had part of his house burnt down in Pennsylvania. Obviously, Trump himself was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, another attempt later. How worried are you as an elected official about political violence? Do you take special precautions in the wake of things like what happened in Minnesota? What's the deal?
I try not to think about it too much because this is a really ugly moment that we are all living through that is directly being made worse by the person who is in the White House right now, and the kind of drive to demonize and sow division and hate and fear everywhere. I feel very grateful that outside my home there's a police car station 24 hours a day. On the days that some kinds of death threats or other things come in, the commissioner will send sometimes a second car just to be there. I don't usually ask why or what the specific thing that triggered it was. There have been more two-car days in recent days, but I think the reality across the country for so many in more visible positions, whether it is in politics or a different kind of area, it's just the frustration and the pain and stress that so many families are feeling is very real in terms of how far some of our policies have gotten to actually delivering the relief that people need in their lives, right? Grocery prices going up, housing costs going up. It feels like you could do everything right and still it is so hard. And then there's a layer of, instead of disagreeing and finding ways through civil dialogue to come up with solutions, it's just a tax. It's just, billionaire money that goes to fund certain kinds of rhetoric, tearing down communities, and especially when it comes to cities, even just, going back to the ICE conversation, now that there's this narrative that ICE has to be sent in to take care of the largest cities because they're rampant and overrun with crime, and the statistics show that violence and crime is falling in major cities all across the country. Boston has had one of the biggest drops recorded, and we're at the lowest point in our city's recorded history of homicides and gun violence. But it's not, this is coming from people who don't live in these communities. If you look around Boston, if you were at Pride, just yesterday we were on City Hall Plaza celebrating we'd invited in all of the Boston residents who completed the Boston Marathon to hang out together. We had our youth sports champions celebration where every team that won a mayor's cup over the last year or a state or national championship came in. There are restaurants that are happening, shows, museums for free for our children, summer programs, senior program. Amazing, wonderful things are happening in Boston and in cities everywhere. And yet the narrative can be, when all you see when you turn on your TV and you don't necessarily live in certain communities, is that people are horrible and things are going in the wrong direction and everything is burning down, combined with the free flow of firearms and guns in far too many communities. That's a recipe for what we're seeing now. And so we are safe in Boston because we have some of the strongest gun laws in the country in Massachusetts, and they are enforced. We have relationships and a different approach with our public safety officials and community members, and we fundamentally will not back down from safety and community being about belonging and connection.
Thank you.
Mary, we asked you about this before, but this woman that was fired from her job at City Hall after this controversy about a domestic violence arrest, she claims that she got fired because you wanted to cover up an election year scandal, and now the city's Department of Human Resources has launched this investigation into what happened with Shiguni Duwu, one of your top aides. What's the latest? And we were talking this morning. He could have just said he was there at the beginning of this and had seen this woman at this restaurant bar at the beginning of this. So what's the latest on this?
So I think in some of what the recent discussion has been, and again, in a little bit of the kind of political spaces where a lot of conversation is happening, given that it is an election year, is that there are actually two separate issues here that sometimes are getting conflated. There was a situation that happened late at night with an interaction when Boston police were called. And the police report and the internal review that was done to confirm or refute different parts of what was brought up in the police report show that former city employees invoked their city official status, that they worked for the city, to try to get out of consequences, that there was harm perpetuated on the, physical force used on a police officer. Yep. There were other things that happened that rose to the level of not matching the standards for employment as a city worker. And that's that. Now there's a separate question of whether there was a different situation that may have happened earlier in the evening. It doesn't erase the things that did happen that were clearly part of the decision-making for standards for our city workforce. But whenever there's any new information received, any new allegations of employee misconduct, the city always, again, as a major employer, has processes in place to go through and to conduct investigations. At no point in the internal review about what happened that night were there allegations of misconduct about a different, other employee raised. Were not raised in interviews, were not communicated. They were later raised through the media in a Boston Globe report. And so now that has, to date, they still have not been directly raised. But because they were have come to the attention of the city, we are following the standard processes to conduct an investigation on these allegations, to bring in the support of external counsel to do that, and to make sure that we are, again, following the protocols and the rules to hold all of our city workers to the standards that the public deserves.
One follow-up to that, though, if I just can, is touching on what Marjorie said a minute ago. You said to the Globe, when the second story came out, the one about the time spent between the woman and Mr. Adowu from your staff, you hadn't heard about this until the Globe story. Shouldn't he have volunteered in the initial investigation that he had spent time with the woman earlier that evening, even if, I don't know, innocent, non-innocent?
So I'm not going to...
So you did know about it?
Yes. As we had said, there was an internal review done that was looking at what happened that night, and it reached certain conclusions about the behavior and the standards for 2 employees who were then let go from their positions. And there was a review about what had occurred and whether there were policies that were violated around work hours, non-work hours, personal versus professional. And because there were no allegations raised about this particular type of misconduct, that was not the investigation.
A texter has a good question, whether the city has a workplace policy about relationships with coworkers, because some people would read these stories and say, Shagun Idowu is I don't know what he is, 33 or 36. He's out one night. He sees a woman who's 26. He's single. She's single. He's not her direct boss, as I understand it, although he's a powerful guy in your administration. Is that against the rules? I mean, is that, we know about boss and person underneath them. I think this is to many people, confusing because he's not technically her boss. So is that against the rules, or is that not against the rules?
So the rules that the city govern how the city administers our HR policies around relationships is the conflict of interest law and ethics laws. And so there cannot be relationships between people who are in a supervisory in a supervisory situation within a reporting structure, let's say, or to act in ways that would be a conflict of interest. So even if not a romantic relationship, if there was a sibling relationship with someone who's applying for something in the city, this or that or the other. But there are many city employees who are married to each other or in relationships who are in different departments. In this case, there were, just 2 people who were not in a supervisory situation, work in different buildings outside of work hours. And so, of course, whenever there is any allegation or suggestion that there has been misconduct, the city is investigating that thoroughly.
Okay.
Eleni, do I pronounce your name right, I hope? Eleni is at the mic at the library. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
So there's this idea that building more sky rises will somehow lower the prices, the costs, which we've seen a lot of sky rises, and so have the prices gone too. And I was wondering why not buy a building, the city buy the buildings high end, and have the city own them to create actual real competition to lower the prices with public-private sector.
Eleni, thank you.
Thank you for raising that. So I agree with you that it's a more complicated picture than just one equation of supply and demand. We certainly need more housing, and Boston has among the highest housing costs in the country, as does Massachusetts. And whereas Boston has been actually meeting and exceeding many of our housing production goals over the last decade, we are often a bright spot among many other communities in the area who may not be producing as much housing according to the scale that's possible. And so, I'm part of the Metro Mayors Association. There's a lot of conversations in this area about what our collective housing goals should be and how everyone should be contributing to them. Because the reality is that even if Boston were to produce a whole lot more housing here, as long as we're still in an ecosystem where people can travel and live in this, or where the surrounding areas are not doing the same, or where funding can flow from all around the world to immediately invest in these properties. It can take a whole bigger scale of new housing production to actually see the same kinds of shifts in costs coming down than, for example, in some other parts of the country. We still need to do everything we can so that more people who want to live in Boston can live in Boston, can do so affordably. The city does not have the budget to be able to buy up, high-end properties. And there's also, theoretically, if we could be able to do that if we could somehow then profit off of them. But by state law, when municipal governments own some property, they have to be used for a fully public purpose, meaning we couldn't just operate rentals, right? So Boston Housing Authority is a separate entity that is one example of where we can operate subsidized housing, but that is open to all. There's a lottery system and this and that. So there are probably two programs that I want to mention that are maybe three. Anyway, I'll go through a couple things. One is that we have in fact been purchasing properties that are market rate apartments that are being rented out at private apartments that are being rented at below market rates, and then working with usually a nonprofit or other entity who then is committed and writing in their legal documents that they will keep the rents low. It's effectively a form of rent control when you can purchase a property that is in the market, take it off the speculative market, and then keep rents at, for example, only being able to go up 2% a year. We have had more than 1,000 families be able to stay in their homes because of that acquisition opportunity program. It used federal funding for a good chunk of those acquisitions, but as those dollars have been totally used up, we partnered with the major hospitals in the area who have community mitigation funds. They've replenished that fund, and now there's a revolving fund where the next set of projects will get this funding to be able to convert to permanently affordable. Then the funding returns once those projects are capitalized, and then we can fund the next set. There's also a program where we are increasing the number of publicly subsidized units for the first time in a very long time. So there are about 3,000 units of public subsidized housing that if we could find a way to fund the construction of, the federal government, according to current laws, should be on the hook to maintain and pay for the maintenance of into the future. So we've been doing that work. And we've also been working with the banks so that private families, so basically our co-purchasing pilot, means that with many of the buildings in Boston, they're multifamily homes, triple deckers, for example, and even if someone could afford to buy it and rent it out, they can't afford the down payment because it's so big. But we are creating a program where families can come together, different households can purchase it collectively with their money combined, and then have it underwritten so that they will each own a portion of that property. And the city is offering up to 5% down payment assistance for that.
Eleni, thanks for your question. We really appreciate it.
Let's go to-
877-301-8970. My apologies.
Audrey from Brighton is calling. Thank you for calling, Audrey. You're on with the mayor.
Hi, Audrey.
Oh my goodness, hello. Thank you so much, Maru, for taking my question.
Sure.
Okay, so my name is Audrey. So I've lived in Boston for about 10 years. So I'm calling with a question regarding your addiction first policy. I voted for you because you campaigned on a platform of, evidence-based public health approach to substance use and homelessness. But I've really been seeing, as someone who works in this field, how your addiction first policy has really actually removed or reduced access to these services in favor of increased policing and criminalization. And so I'm wanting to know, why are you doubling down on this really carceral and punitive approach that all of the evidence shows us only lead to worse health outcomes for folks? And also, why have you left our unhoused community members who are most impacted by these policies out of all of these discussions with various community members?
Mayor?
Well, thank you for your work and thank you for your advocacy. I would describe our approach as continuing to move forward even as the very big challenge of the opiate crisis and mental health and homelessness has been affecting cities everywhere and continues to be a very difficult situation. So when I first came into office, one of the first things that we did was to work to establish low threshold housing for the first time ever in the city, 200 plus units, to be able to accommodate the many, many people who had been living in and around the Newmarket Triangle, Southampton Street, Atkinson Street for some up to 7-8 years since the Long Island Bridge had been taken down. And because of the housing surge and the matching of people with their individual needs into low threshold housing or shelter, we were able to remove the encampments and ensure that people have better living conditions, safer, greater access to wraparound supports than what had been happening at Mass and Cass, where it was daily calls to the fire department because propane tanks were being used for heat, causing fires, daily, multiple times a day calls for violence, for assaults among the residents who had been living there, and overdoses, and just the picture of suffering and in a community that has the resources. And so we had further then passed an ordinance that would allow for our public safety and public health departments to work together very closely to ensure that encampments did not pop back up in the city, and then to now be at a place where there is housing, there is shelter has been expanded, and shelter transformation has happened so that people can feel safer and more able to access that shelter. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's pointed as a question of, do people only, are the only options that people live in encampments because harm reduction means that we have to do everything possible to preserve the ability for everyone to do what they need to do as they're living with substance use disorder, or do we, throw everyone in jail? Those are not the two options that are sort of on or off switch. And we've really had a push to make sure that we're blending the need for public health and public safety and street outreach. We can't do this without, by removing public safety completely from the equation. And so we've hit what I believe is the balance of being able to effectively provide services citywide, to have the infrastructure that we have built up that did not exist before, but now there's a clear way for people to access that continuum of care. We've had hundreds of people move through that pipeline from living on the street to being able to hold down a job and to have housing counseling and to have rent supports, to being in permanent housing. Pine Street Inn and other providers have been cutting the ribbon and creating more units of supportive housing than ever before. And so we're working this from every angle. And of course, our housing crisis overall and lack of supports for mental health overall is a huge driver. But we are seeing that the numbers are going down in terms of number of people who are on the streets. The number of people who have been accessing care has been going up. But we're certainly not there yet and are going to continue to try to provide and meet people where they are, but not have Boston be a city where people have to live on the streets in order to survive.
Thank you for your call. Brad from Fall River, we have a minute and it's yours, so please be brief. Brad.
Is there yeah, I'm here.
Take it.
Go ahead.
Go.
Is there a veterans tax credit initiative on the plan or on the books down the road sometime this year for veterans who say make $50,000 or less in the state of Massachusetts? And is there also a veterans job fair for veterans in and around Boston?
Yeah, you cut out for a second. I think you were asking about veterans tax relief or tax benefit in the first part. But what I will say is that, yes, there's an annual stand-down event that provides services, and everyone comes on City Hall Plaza with job resources, with all sorts of services available. That happens in partnership with the New England Home for Veterans and the city's Office of Veteran Services. So we can get you plugged into that. It usually happens in the fall, if I remember correctly. And also on your tax question, that would be something that would require state legislation. So. But I think the city actually opted into a housing preference for veterans recently. So if you call the office, we will stay on, we'll get your information, we'll get you plugged into all the resources.
Brad, don't go away. A producer will get your contact information. and the mayor's office will reach out to you. Mayor Wu, it's good to see you as always. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much. We missed baby Mia being here, but that's okay. She's here. She's here somewhere. Okay, there she is. Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Wu, for coming in. We much appreciate it. We've been talking to Mayor Wu for the last hour. We very much appreciate her coming in and taking the time to be with us and with you guys. Thanks for everybody who came down to the Boston Public Library. We appreciate that too. And keep up with us 24/7 way of our podcast, or check out our TikTok page at Boston Public Radio. Tomorrow, we have a best of edition because we're taking a day-long staff retreat, so Jim can complain, as he always does at the staff retreat. We'll listen back to conversations with PBS European travel guru Rick Steves tomorrow, Nobel Peace Prize winning, journalist Maria Rice. By the way, that was one of the most incredible interviews I've ever done in my whole life. A performance from the indie rock mainstays as well, Carbon Leaf, and the husband and wife duo, Roger Brown and Linda Mason. You may know them. They started Bright Horizons, the child daycare, many years ago. Our crew, we want to thank them: Zoe Matthews, Aiden Conley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss. Our additional support from Nia Harmon. Our engineer is John Claude Parker. Our executive producer is Jimmy Bologna. He's the one with the great laugh. Special thanks to our BPL staff, Maddie Geyer, Patrick Lally, Juan Jose Cadena, our host of the Newsfeed Cafe, and across the street at the Lenox Hotel. The Culture Show with Jared Bowen starts right after we're done here on 89.7 GBH. I am Marjorie Egan.
I'm Jim Browdy.
Thanks again for tuning in today. Thanks again for the folks that came down to the Boston Public Library. And remember, it's Marjorie for governor or dog catcher, one way, in the next campaign. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Telemann's Jester Suite with Collegia Musicum 90 and Simon Standage conducting your afternoon stretch.
Tonight on GBH2, the tale of dinosaurs is one of struggle, love, and survival. The ultimate ancient drama. The stunning 6-part series Walking with Dinosaurs continues tonight at 8 on GBH2.
Classical Radio Boston is WCRB-FM 99.5 HD1 Lowell, Boston, WGBH-FM HD2 Boston, WCAI-FM HD2 Woods Hole, WJMF-FM HD1 Smithfield, Providence, and at classical.org.
It's 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. Greg Farisi here. Thanks for tuning in. Coming up, we're going to enjoy Handel's The Cuckoo and the Nightingale, and also Mozart's first piano concerto featuring Daniel Barenboim. Here now,